Good afternoon and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I am Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. My co-host today is Renee Johnston. How are you doing today, Renee?
I am here. Ha
I totally understand. I am glad to be here. I'm glad to have important stuff to talk about, but I'm also glad that I started a little later and got to sleep just that little bit longer today. I like to start nice and early, but I didn't mind when Dr. Levant said noon instead of 11. Here we are.
Hey guys, let me see.
And here's Dr. Levant. Welcome.
Let me see. We're not live yet, are we?
We are. I went ahead and took us live on the hour since Renee was here, but it's okay.
I'm going to have to go ahead and do what and see where Paul is. 1 second.
Of course.
Okay, let me do this thing here.
I totally understand.
Paul, where are you? Let's see if I have a message saying, I tried the link and something like that. Hope he isn't watching. Okay, let's see. Hey, Paul. Hey, Paul. Here we go. Hey, Paul.
Well, if he's watching, then he knows we're ready for him, so that wouldn't be a total disaster.
Yeah, but he'd hear what I just said.
Oh, fair.
Paul, let's see. I'm going to give up in a minute. I'm going to write, come on over. And I'm going to type meow, because that usually gets attention. Okay. And then I will give up and I will give you my attention.
I totally understand. And I will add him when he joins us.
I'm pretending I'm not. Okay. So I have that over there. So if I'm like going like this, everyone will know why. Okay. So hi.
Hi. Hey. Nice to meet another Renee.
I know. We have the best name.
I know. It's great.
I went to a festival at one point and I just thought it was so funny. There was so many. And so, it was one of those things where you can organize any group. So I organized a group for everyone named Renee.
Well, and I should say that one of my favorite actors, though it's one less E, one of my favorite actors was Renee Auberjonois, who passed on in 2023, sadly.
Oh, wow. Well, I don't know.
Fun fact, the only real MASH Star Trek connection I can think of. Renee Auberjonois was Odo on Deep Space Nine, and he was Father Mulcahy in the MASH movie. More importantly, the MASH movie was introducing Renee Auberjonois.
Oh.
It was his very first movie acting job. That was
also you're older than me. If you're talking MASH, I mean, I was there for some reruns, but you're even older than me.
So you have to understand that I am a Gen Xer.
Renee, did you watch MASH?
So I did not watch MASH because I was a kid when MASH was on, like when it was I was a kid.
Number one, I was a kid. Number one, I was a kid. Number two, these were the days of syndicated television when Star Trek and MASH were on every night on local channels.
Right.
Well, so you must have seen the post I made where I talked about having been cool and then was no longer. Because I would go up and give that's why I was wondering why he was mentioning Star Trek with me. So he must have seen my post where I said, I knew I was no longer cool when I went up to teach a class of freshmen and mentioned Star Trek and had them all looking at me like,
I know.
Then old lady. But the thing is, I am Kira Nerys, so
yes,
not regular, but I am Karen Nerys. I mean, Karen Nerys is it. So that's the only thing I would say. And she's also clearly a Palestinian.
Well, I want to talk about this, actually. This is a very good number one. Well, she's not very active on Twitter anymore. Michelle Forbes, the actress who played Ro Laren, the original Bajoran, the original Palestinian on Star Trek.
Wait a minute, we had this last time. You're not going to get me talking about stuff I don't know again.
Okay, that's fair. She follows on Twitter. She has very good politics. She's surprisingly similar to to the sort of person who would join a resistance group in another star system.
Sarah wasn't exactly in a resistance group now. She struggled between kind of her, political and her.
Well, in the end, she went in undercover. She was going in undercover for Captain Picard, but she defected to the Maquis.
Right. Well, it was tough. But yes, so hello.
Hello, and thanks for joining us again, and thanks for being here. We did get a decision from the court before the show, like we were talking about.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It was coming anytime. Yeah.
Yes.
I was actually a little surprised it was that fast.
So
honestly,
yeah,
I mean, it wasn't as fast as it could have been.
It wasn't. So this is what you were talking about before we went on the air, where people don't understand it. It's really important for folks to understand what this was about, why it went as fast as it did, but why it's just the beginning.
No, what I mean by fast is just because the U.S. and the Western world are all into trying to slow this entire anything that has any plausible thing going against them.
Once it gets to this step in the ICJ, it actually has to go fairly quickly because they have rules.
Yeah.
And the first step is the three takeaways of this are basically what this is saying is we have reasonable cause to believe there is a genocide. It must be investigated now, which was always the whole point of this. This wasn't to get a finding of, yes, there's absolutely a genocide. The point was always, we have a reasonable basis to believe a genocide is happening. It must be investigated.
Is happening or could be happening.
Go ahead, Renee. Dr. Levant, sorry. I think you're muted.
You're muted still. Yep.
You're still muted.
No, you're still unmute.
It's down on the
bottom in the
down in the corner. Mute, unmute.
I wonder how come that muted. Okay, let's see. This is a little too high there. Okay, so first of all, the first thing I think is important to keep in mind because I'm not a legal scholar or a legal advocate. I know a lot about this because of running the campaign, but I want to say a word about that look, there are people right now saying this was great. We'll explain this as I was asked to in a minute. And there are people saying this sucks. And both are true.
Yes.
And so, but that the main thing that the reason, like for the campaign, which will answer your question, is because we wanted to find a way to get something out there quickly that had a chance of a ceasefire and of actual relief. Or at least, if it didn't do that, it was going to expose the court system. We realized that a high likelihood what the court system would do is neither turn it down, like Israel said, nor grant the provisional measures. Exactly. But come up with something that was minimal. It's actually a little more maximal than what I would have expected, but it's not. Here's the thing. What it didn't do, a lot of people say, but if they did ceasefire, they did say don't kill any Palestinians and don't hurt any. It literally, it does say that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of funny in the middle of this. And
right. And I've heard two spins on that too. The South African ambassador said that in his legal opinion, you could not follow this ruling without a de facto ceasefire.
Well, so here's the thing. We never came to this thinking that the court was going to solve the problem.
Yeah, because it's a court. It doesn't have enforcement mechanisms.
Well, no, because it's the imperialist court.
Well, that too.
Right, because this court was not set up to help people working for self-determination and against colonialism. This court was set up to actually keep the power. So it was amazing to see, as someone who long worked around South African activism, the South African delegation come in that room and be standing in the middle of that court. It does neither. What it sets up for, though, is the following. The provisional measures are not a decision saying that Israel's committing genocide.
Yes.
It's not even saying they're probably committing genocide.
No.
No. It's merely saying it is possible, on the basis of the evidence that was presented, that there is a danger or that genocide could be being committed.
I will do one small quibble.
No. And that prevention is the point of the Geneva Convention thing. And so it doesn't have to be an actual genocide for us to have an obligation to prevent genocide. Okay. Now, they do then look at specific details and say, based on these things happening, and that there could be intent, though we're not sure, that's usually where the cases are going to wind up just in humanitarian law, ultimately. For the sake of preventing a genocide and having, if the court believes that, man, if we don't come up with something here, we're going to have blood about and genocide all over our hands and lose all credibility. That's what the provisional measures are to do.
Yes.
In the real sense, right? It's to prevent a genocide and to say. And so they want to say, okay, so the things we were concerned about was the disproportionate number of people killed, the disproportionate number of people who were wounded, the issue of famine, the conditions of life. So they go through that and they go, okay, what do we need to do to resolve those issues? And one of the questions is, do we need a ceasefire? And they didn't decide a ceasefire. Now, it's true that what we all will clearly say, and we would have said it no matter what the court said, because how in the world, it's impossible to do this without a ceasefire. But there's something the court didn't say that's very important here. Violence and the danger of genocide is talked about in international law in the context of a siege, or and in terms of occupation, and that didn't come up in any way in the case. I mean, they mentioned occupation and all of this, but in other words, the argument that they avoided because it's so hot is the fact is that the siege is a violence. When you go and you lock people in and you're controlling what comes in and out, even if Israel wasn't as bad as it was, the mere act of having Gaza in a siege is not only illegal, but it's a violence.
If this was a situation of nation states, it's where you throw around words like act of war.
Right.
And I don't like to call it a war because it's not a war. It's an occupation.
And it's actually worse than a war here.
Yes, exactly.
Is my mic working? You know what I think's happening? I think this isn't working and they're probably picking up the other one. So if
I hear you good, but yeah, it might be the computer mic.
That's why that isn't working. So, okay. So if they started from the siege, then you can come out with a solution.
Yeah.
Because
in the siege.
The siege has to be ended. It's both the cause of any violence that Israel's complaining about, and saying that I'm not equating the violence of the oppressed and the oppressor, but merely saying, yes, when you have a siege, you're going to have violence, period.
Well, you attack someone, they will defend themselves. Let's put it that way.
Now, the other thing is, so if it's been under siege for 17 years, and then these things happen, that puts a whole different context on things. It's not merely the context of occupation, but it's the context of siege.
This is why trolls deny the siege. This is why they say Israel left and pretend that Israel has nothing to do with Gaza anymore.
Neither legally nor morally does that matter one iota. So long as Israel exercises effective control of what comes in and its distribution, and if it thinks it has the right to go in and do these things, it is occupied, but also it's definitely, the siege was never denied. It is under siege. They just think it's legitimate. Now, if you want to stop the humanitarian crisis, the one thing that's clear is you can't have Israel or the US in charge of it. That won't work. And so that's the issue. I don't think Israel's decision has a thing to do with this. And the reason I don't is, yes, of course, but we all know no matter what they came up with, with what they came up with, Israel isn't going to listen to anything. We all know that already. They had pretty much said that already, although we thought maybe they'd waver a little because it's the first time they ever actually felt compelled to come into a court. So that's a big deal. But if they dealt with the siege, then they can deal with questions like, how do we actually get resources from one place to another? Because so much of the complaints, even of the United Nations head of Antonio, how do I say his last name? Gutierrez? No, it's not Gutierrez. What was it?
No, Antonio. Let me.
No, but anyway, so we know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
The only way, he had said that they were coming in and 90% of what they were trying to give was denied by Israel. Now, Israel, of course, denies that, but they always have. And then it's always, proof always comes much later. So I don't think that first of all, I don't think it's that interesting why they did it. I think there's an error in these conversations focusing on what was the internal dynamic of the court for two reasons. One, it is not what's going to make the difference in Gaza. Two, because we don't really know. What we know is there was a lot of politics. We know that the head was a full-on U.S. State Department person, and she went for every measure. We know the history of the court and how it reacts to things, anything Israel, and that it's never done something like this. But we also know they were under a lot of pressure, and who was pressuring who and why, which judge made which decision. We don't know. What I will tell you is that the question kind of assumes that a court would care about, if there was no political pressure, they wouldn't care about pressure, right? They care about it because there is political pressure. There was one British judge who had taken a stand against the ethnic cleansing of a British island. And the result of that was that he was blacklisted. He couldn't do anything afterwards. Okay, so there's a lot of pressure, and we're seeing that pressure now with the United Nations Relief and Works Association.
Yes.
Refugee Works Association. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. Regardless of what they do, what move the court made, we knew what we had to do. One, we knew that until we had a decision, we had to try to put as much pressure on nations that were likely to be supportive to do the right thing and actually not just make a statement, but submit something called the Declaration of Intervention, which means they're actually on the case. They can actually say, they can add information and they can add interpretations of law on genocide or on law, international law, as it should apply to this case. So no one is really fully on board until they do a declaration of intervention. And doing that also has another implication, which is generally when people make a declaration of intervention, they're pretty serious about it because, for one thing, they can make any statement they want. The U.S. will be fine. I mean, Saudi made a statement supporting the South African case. It is so not on the Palestinian side, but the Arab street is such that they didn't want to not have said something. And, they do that. And then they go ahead and they do things that hurt the cause. So the issue here is, but once you make that declaration of intervention, you're in a whole nother world, right? You are part of the case. You are one of the parties. And you have a responsibility also then to enact it in a very special way. All signatures of the U.S. have a responsibility to prevent and to follow through on the issues around genocide. But if you're a party of the case, then you're committing to it in a different way, which means that once this ruling came, as we knew, it has to go to the United Nations for decisions. And we know it will be vetoed if it's anything significant in the Security Council. Now, what's going to the United Nations, though? Some people thought these particular things were going, right? In other words, the orders of the court would then go to the United Nations. They're not going. The orders of the court are legally binding. The responsibility of the United Nations is to enact things so that they will be enforced. This is where the comment from various people that these cannot be enacted and enforced without a ceasefire. And as the Palestinians are saying now, and clearly and a lifting of the siege. Without those two factors, there can be absolutely no, I think I'm hearing someone. Without those two factors, there can't be any way that we're going to improve and prevent genocide. And so therefore we have to do it. And in fact, Algeria will be bringing a resolution to the Security Council on Wednesday. Did you know that already? Or
okay, no, I'm just listening.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I wondered, but they're going to be bringing this resolution on Wednesday that will include those things: ceasefire and the lifting of the siege. Of course, the U.S. is not going to agree to lift the siege on Gaza or ceasefire. And the response has been so clear, right? But once that happens, then the question is, it goes to the Security Council. And then, because it was vetoed, or if it's not, if they think other steps need to be taken to meet what was vetoed, they can create a Uniting for Peace resolution in the General Assembly. Now, we saw one of those, and it was ridiculous. It was get aid, get in the aid they need, right? And that's all. It had nothing about how you would get in the aid they need. Well, the issue is that they don't have their own police force or any way to enforce either. The way this works, if it's going to work, is you have to already have nations bought in to a particular strategy to enforce and make this happen and committed to doing it. And that can be with the Uniting for Peace resolution. The General Assembly can do anything from, again, it's based on that the Security Council is being sabotaged and we won't vote on it. But they can do anything up to and engage in armed combat.
Full-scale Korean War style police action with multiple member nations going to Palestine. Now, also, this is a good time to bring up something Beth says here, because it's really important to understand when you talk about if these organizations call for a ceasefire and aren't listened to, it would definitely undermine the power of these international organizations and spur a war. No, it would let the cat out of the bag that these organizations have no power, that they only have the power they are allowed to have by the permanent members of the Security Council, which is, this is the sort of thing you have to remember about the whole United Nations structure. The United Nations is based on the older framework of the League of Nations, but with the addition of the Security Council and the ability to have theoretical enforcement measures if enough of the member governments agree.
Well, the issue is that the governments have to have a commitment to these specific members. So here's the question.
But where I was going is the purpose of the League of Nations was not to allow someone to complain about a genocide the Germans were committing in Namibia, but rather in order to create a forum where someone would be able to complain, and then the colonial powers would be able to shut it down and do their thing anyway.
I actually don't think that. I think it was about how it impacted them. But
that's true, but it comes down to
this, because this is what matters. What matters is right now there's a genocide going on.
Yeah.
So I get tired of focusing on the legalistic of this, because you know what? It doesn't help. It's true. Not relevant. It doesn't either tell you what to do or what's happening in the situation. The fact of the matter is, the only way that this legal situation will make the difference now is if South Africa and the pressure we've put on it already have a plan where those states that are not a part of the Western coalition have decided to stand up to the USA.
And so far, the only state that appears to have a plan for that is Yemen.
No, they're the state that has a certain kind of plan, and I think they're super cool. But the thing is, there are other kinds of plans. South Africa, for example, is going to also be bringing the U.S. and England up. But again, I want not to focus on just the legalistics of it here. You have, on the one hand, the legal measures that are going to be being fought out at the United Nations, and then you have the other actions. I believe we have had a response already, and the response was what they said in withdrawing funds for the United Nations, for their organization that was literally created because of its complicity in the oppression of Palestine and in the creation of Palestinian refugees. So that what happened was in 1948, when the United Nations decided, we think there needs to be a Jewish state in light of what's happened, and also this is Palestinian land. So what we're going to do is we're going to petition Palestine into a Jewish and a Palestinian land. And at the same time, they're saying this in the middle of a Nakba, where they're creating all kinds of Palestinian refugees all over the place. So what happened was interesting is they came up with two different things. They said they had two things, each had its own resolution. One was Resolution 302 that created, how do you say it right? UNRWA, UNRWA, United Nations Refugee Works Association.
Yeah.
Or I have to take a look.
The UNRWA.
Yes. So when you created that, what was it? It's the only time ever the UN has done this. It was because of their knowing that they helped to ensure that these people would be displaced. And they therefore felt that with 700,000 Palestinians being taken out of Palestinian land, and the brutality and the creation of refugees in Palestine, and as well as in Syria and in Lebanon and Jordan, that they needed to do something until the other thing they passed, until the Palestinians could return to their land in both places. Now, that issue is because a basic principle of both international law and human rights law is that all people have a right to return.
Yes.
The problem is they created these refugees and Israel didn't want to. So what they did was they made a separate resolution on the right to return just for the Palestinians. And that resolution required Israel to let them return and to have a plan that they can either return or choose not to and get paid recompense for both what happened in the Nakba as well as in their expulsion from the land, as well as for choosing not to return, or they could return, and that would be to either section of anything, river to the sea. All right. So that's when UNRWA was created. And what it did was it was to be there till the return. The return that never happened. Meanwhile, because of this kind of ambiguity of the UN, in order for Israel to become a part of the United Nations, it had to agree to three things. It had to agree, one, to enforce the partition plan. In other words, you can't just make them all refugees. You have to also set up, according to the partition plan, Palestinian sovereignty in the other area. Second, you had to take in all the refugees. And third, you had to guarantee that you agreed and would promptly enforce on all of these things Jerusalem remaining unchanged ethnically. Right? Three things that are exactly what has not happened with the taking of homes in Jerusalem, with the denial of Palestinian statehood, et cetera, et cetera. So Israel was only allowed in because they agreed on these things, which they never then did. So this organization is a pain in the butt because it is literally a reminder of the Nakba and of the denial of the right to return, and that it is Palestinian land that was divided, and that the United Nations was the biggest part of it.
And that's why we are seeing the U.S. now echo, to use the words, to slightly paraphrase the words of Israel's permanent representative to the UN, right. UN aid workers are Hamas.
Right. Well, and they're actually saying more. Netanyahu actually just did this thing where he went in and he held up a Mein Kampf, and he actually said that the Palestinian people are all Nazis and want to kill them all. And he just said it. And this is after a ruling that said he had to not incite and ensure there was no inciting and punish any inciting. And of course, everything in these last days has been extremely hard and intense, from deaths to maimings to the situation with aid not coming in and being blocked by them in various ways. But what this was, there is something that came out of this court case. The specifics aren't important. What is important is it is the first time ever that the state of Israel even showed up and was held to account.
Yep.
And the danger, which is made clear and openly by the African National Congress, who have said that they will be doing a case for the participation of the United States and the UK, and that was even before the most recent things. Well, all of a sudden, you have, South Africa is calling on apartheid Israel. This is a state that was highly funded by Israel when it was an apartheid state. There was a lot of overlap. And even now, if you think that after the revolution in South Africa, some of those people aren't going to want to stay.
There are pro-Israel troll accounts claiming to be white South Africans, saying that the ANC is not the legitimate government of South Africa in response to this case, by the way.
Right. I know there's some of that, but what there also is, but those are really, that's not the norm in South Africa.
No, that's the propaganda machine responding to
But what's a bigger deal is South African Jews, if they're going to leave South Africa because of apartheid, and they're Zionists, where are they going to go? Guess where? They're going to go to Israel in the settlement.
A large number of Dutch South Africans found their Jewish roots after the apartheid government fell in South Africa.
Right.
To this day, there are people in Israel who question the legitimacy of some of those Jewish roots. Should we really have let these folks in?
Right.
But in the end, they let them in because, South African, this is going to reinforce our system.
Right. So the point I'm making here is that you have this nation who was once colonized and once suffered apartheid, standing for another.
Yes.
And it's a reminder of a couple of things. One is sometimes the powerful guys lose. It's also a reminder, I would say, that South Africa didn't do it alone.
No.
Because, they also had help from Cuba, which came in with arms. It was primarily their own struggle, but they also were supported in fact. The other issue here is that if you look at who went to join to do that declaration, I couldn't believe it. St. Vincent's and the Grenadines was the first ones, a little Caribbean ex-colonized island.
Yes.
And then the next one to do something, there were other places. Jordan said it would, which they have to because their population is mostly Palestinian refugees who become Jordanian.
It's really important to understand the demographics of Jordan.
Yeah, but let me continue. Yeah. The other people that came in, hold on 1 minute, that is Paul, but was Nicaragua. Hi, Paul, you're on the air right now. Why don't you click the link and be officially? You're on the air. They can hear what you're saying to me, so that's what I'm telling you. That.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm on the air. Why don't you go and click that link that's in your messenger and come on in?
Okay.
See you in a minute, Paul. So Paul is one of our members and with a lot of experience. But so you had Nicaragua, which has suffered great attacks from the United States and also had a successful revolution. And even after they attempted to overturn it, they got it back despite it. So my point is that when you take all the nations, there really is a West against the rest that has been lining up here.
Yes.
The United States is losing its power. On the other hand, it's very, very powerful.
Yes.
Right. So what you've got is a rising multipolar potential, but I'm saying potential, and a U.S. that does not want that.
Yeah.
So this issue in Palestine, I'm going to suggest, is going to be the central issue around what this battle is being played out.
I tend to agree.
So as we look at the Palestinian issue, the question is the very foundations of this court, which did come out of the Nazi period so that this wouldn't happen. It did come out of setting up a state of Israel, setting up an organization to deal with the Palestinian refugees and giving them the right of return. All of this, we are back to 1948 right now. And right now, part of why they're cutting off the aid is to commit genocide.
Yes.
And so, why? Because that's what they did then, right? This is all about, right now, either they are in charge or the rising world order will be.
Well, to go back to the League of Nations again, when the League of Nations declared an arms embargo on all parties in the Ethiopian war, who was hurt by that more? Italy? No, they had their own nationalized modern munitions industry. The people who were hurt by the embargo were the Ethiopians trying to defend themselves from Italy.
Right. And well, I think that the issue, again, I'm going to keep it on Palestine. So I'm not going to go on the tangent.
I've used those examples because history repeats itself a lot.
Yes.
And we do the same things
right now in the history of the Nakba repeating.
Yes, of course.
And the fact that the people in Palestine are dying. That's my focus.
Of course.
And I think it should be everyone's. I really think that, like, when we worry too much about the legal, we're losing it. The legal is for the people doing law. That's great. They need to. This is one of the fronts, but it's only one of the fronts. And what's going to matter is that we have a clear agenda and that we basically fight for it and impose it.
I do think it's important for people to understand how illegitimate the legal is, and to understand that the legal stuff is not really all that legal. It's something winners put in place.
Well, and it's also, if you look at the history, on the one hand, the court does try to be actually judicial rather than political.
Yes.
However, saying that, then when you look, that things generally go by the positions of their countries. If you look at all the history of cases, in general, it has gone that way. Not always, but it generally, when it comes to the final, and it can be different with provisional, because provisional has a different weight. But so, yeah, it generally is not the place for justice to happen. On the other hand, we are in a unique period where certain nations who are a part of the UN now, are saying, to 5 people in the security, to the whole structure. At the same time, we're telling our governments that we are not going to stand by while they are committing these atrocities and doing it in the name of us as citizens of the United States, as citizens of the UK, as citizens of Germany, and everywhere else. And that, we're not interested in the benefits that come in that sense from being settler colonizers in this country, because they're really not all that great for our people.
No.
They don't work. Yeah. So that's, I think, where it's really important. Now I'm distracted because since Paul had just come up, I'm thinking, Paul, where are you?
So just real quick, a couple of things that I wanted to kind of throw out there. So one, and this is something that I noticed in my reading of the decision and the order, is they magically managed to replace Palestinians with Palestinians in Gaza throughout the order, which I find troubling, because there are many Palestinians who are being removed, displaced, starved, imprisoned, everything
that was already happening in the West Bank before is still happening and has been accelerated because of this.
Exactly.
Oh, and it's been greatly accelerated. Yes.
Right. And so they managed to cleverly do that, which I found to be truly problematic.
Well, actually, it's very problematic, but it starts with South Africa and the case, if we're being honest, because what troubled me about the case made by South Africa is it really was Gaza.
No, I read the 85 pages, and
I read the 85 pages too. Please listen a minute. Although they began with the broad strokes, all they were asking for was toward Gaza.
Well, when I read it, it started with stopping the military action in Gaza, but the remainder of it did not say Palestinians in Gaza. It just said Palestinians.
They define it as that. I've listened also to them presenting it, and I read it very carefully. And in fact, not only did I read it carefully, but I so much agree with you that what the Campaign to Invoke the Genocide Act did, that we varied when other places were just asking other places to join onto the case and invoke. Since cases that join are able to expand or to do other things, we asked the nations, partly because whether they listened to us or not, we would be putting the education out there to include the West Bank and Jerusalem. All right, because the South African case wasn't. And I believe they did that in a very deliberate reason, which was to get the provisional measures. And I think they worried about trying to apply the genocide, not human rights, but to the broader group. My position was that shouldn't be a problem, because if you say Palestinians, it can only be a group, but it would have freed them up to say this much broader thing. All they would have had to do was make it much easier to.
So I guess I'm just confused, because I just pulled it up to reread it, because I was trying to figure out. So like number 6 specifically, which is after they speak about Gaza, says the state of Israel shall, in relation to Palestinians, comma, ensure that it does not say Gaza. So the reason
all of the evidence, they didn't present a shred of evidence about the West Bank in their case.
I recognize that. Okay. And I think I think that was, but I also think it was tactical on their part. Just say Palestinians only in some places in an attempt to, and this, listen, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not.
I don't really care. I care that they clearly did not present anything about what was happening in the West Bank.
Which I did know. Yeah.
They separated Gaza, and I mean, arguing about how to figure what might have been intended, I don't think that matters. What matters is that in both them and the court, that there was a separating out of Gaza, and that was for strategic reasons on their part and on the court's part. But the court had no reason to do anything, since the very reason for issuing any order is because of the evidence presented in the case and its direct link to what needs to happen. And so their case was limited to Gaza, and our organization was very clear that we were understood they may have been doing it, but we were critical of that, both because of the insanity, like when they have a ceasefire then, because Palestine is one, and you wind up having everything escalate in the West Bank. And yes, the West Bank is not under the same level. They are not having famine. They are not having things of the degree. Yes, they are having economic hardship, especially not being allowed in to Israel to work, all kinds of things. They are destroying infrastructure. They are taking a lot more prisoners actually in Gaza. I'm sorry, in the West Bank than in Gaza. And those people are subject to unbelievable conditions.
And that's the reason that this all started in the first place, wasn't it? Taking prisoners to trade for prisoners, partly.
Yeah. Well, it was the whole issue of, it was clear that this was moving to a point where the way the occupation was throughout Palestine was a real threat to their existence.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
And that prisoners are, of course, always high on the agenda.
Yes.
Both because when they're in prison, they actually.
And I was reading in a normal year, and I say normal year, not to normalize anything that's happening in Palestine, but to understand that this is not a normal year. This is an accelerated, insane year from hell in a lot of ways, though parts of it are sadly normal too. Right. But in a normal year, Israel takes 700 to 800 prisoners who are children and holds them under administrative detention, which means we're not charging them, we're locking them up for national security reasons.
And what they're doing now is taking not only children, but what they're really attacking is all the professionals, everyone who could run an independent and sovereign Palestine.
Yeah.
That's who they're aiming at.
Which, I mean, I hate to single out Western propaganda examples of communism here, but when we're talking about a genocide, targeting intellectuals and professionals, that's what Pol Pot did and what everybody thinks of as the archetypical post-Holocaust modern genocide in Cambodia. Targeting professionals.
Not communists or socialists.
No, but they claimed to be.
Capitalist fascists, yeah.
Yeah.
So is the Nazi Socialist
Party.
Anyway,
but they very much deliberately targeted, and when you see Israel doing the same thing, it's just ridiculous for anyone to claim it's not a genocide.
Okay, and even more than that, we are beyond any of these these things. When you have 90% of the people and in these conditions, there's really nothing else to talk about.
Exactly.
We are so far beyond the bring some aid in. We are totally beyond that. There is no such help for the people.
Well, Israel controls whether aid gets in or not completely.
Right. And that's what has to be opposed, is that neither the U.S. nor Israel can have a say on how this is resolved. And that's what we have to be pushing for. Hey, Paul.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hey.
So, Paul, have you been? You haven't been listening. You've been just freshening up, huh?
Yeah. I just came in. Yes, I haven't heard anything you said.
Yeah. So, what would you say is the most important thing, since you did just arrive? And do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, please introduce yourself. Let's start there.
So my name is Paul. I'm a Palestinian living in New Orleans now. I'm a poet, and I've been a long time member of the left for a long time. Worked in Palestinian politics, and now actually I'm just looking for a way to go back to Palestine and join the struggle again, because I think we're at a crossroads. And
it definitely feels that way.
Yeah, it's I first got involved many years ago, but the first Intifada, and it feels like that the to me one of the biggest obstacles is the Palestinian leadership that we have now. It's so regressive and not, it hasn't worked. So,
well, and I can see that, and of course, Israel's gone out of its way to establish a failed subordinate authority answerable to itself to deliberately discredit the idea of Palestinian self-government, which is kind of
that was but that was pretty much telegraphed from the beginning.
True.
You know what I mean, like if you read Edward Said, and they sort of bamboozled Said to sign off on Oslo, and almost immediately he, because if you read the thing, his biggest thing was intellectually and but it's more than intellectual, it's politically, that he used the word undignified. And that if you have a people that have been besieged as we have, right, and then you have this, because to me, and I don't mean to romanticize it, but if you study it, and if you were alive at that point, but like the first Intifada, that was the heart of our revolution, and the reason it was so effective, a lot of it had to do with women. It was and also socialism, because it was popular groups establishing their own self-sustained economy apart from Israel. Mm-hmm. And no offense to the boycott or not eating sabra hummus or anything like that, but what it was that it was an effective way to bring Israel to its knees economically, and because I understand that like the American subsidies continue and all that, but it was the labor force. So like a lot of Palestinian people don't know this, but a lot of Palestinians work in Israel in jobs that Israelis don't want, and it's part of their you know what I mean. So a lot of people stopped going to work, and so a lot of the men were in prisons. There was Ansar, these like awful prisons in the desert and stuff. And because the men were put in prisons, who had to run the shit? The women did. And what they did, they established with the PFLP and the DFLP, they established these what do you call the work collectives, and
yes.
and for food and crafts and clothing. And so by the time 1991, so that was the fourth year of the Intifada, it was so successful that the first accords were in Madrid. And the Madrid Accords, the leadership there was not outside PLO leadership. There were leadership on the ground. So it was Hanan Ashrawi, who's and by the way, great poet also. But a woman of great sense.
I mean, I read her all the time.
Oh yeah.
I know her, but I didn't know she was a poet. Cool.
And she was a professor of literature at Birzeit.
Yeah.
And she was pushed to the, but this happens in America too, like with the black poets like Amiri Baraka, pushed into politics because of a community being under siege, And so yeah, Hanan Ashrawi there was also Dr. Haider Abdel Shafi, from Gaza, who's the founder of the Red Crescent Society. And he was the leader, he was the co-leader with Hanan Ashrawi of that delegation to Madrid. And their line in the sand was right of return. So if you're not going to have right of return, we're not even going to. You know what I mean? And Oslo didn't even entertain it. That was the biggest problem with Oslo was the right of return was sold out, and also that the borders were still controlled by Israel.
That the autonomy was given to a group that didn't have a commitment, that had its own commitment to power, rather than to enabling all the different groups within the PLO.
Yeah, by definition.
Yeah.
But that was also by design. You know what I mean? That was by design.
They really. Well, I remember feeling really hopeful about Oslo at the time, and now it just feels like such a big scam.
Oh yeah, well, I don't think most of anybody from the organization. Go ahead, Paul.
No, I don't mean to burst the bubble or say, oh well, we.
No. I mean, I think it's important that people who had a different.
No, because the DFLP, the PFLP, all begged out, so we knew, because again, like from Saeed, who's not. The dude was not to diminish it, but he's a professor of comparative literature. Really. Not at all. Oh, no, maybe theoretically, but not really a leftist at all. So he saw it right away. He said it's undignified. So, but what you were saying, Eclectic Radical, about that hope, because I don't want to come on here and be cynical. A lot of people had that hope. Even people on the ground that had been in the DFLP and PFLP said, well, you know what? Like, we're going to give this a shot, right? Now, the first thing Arafat did in terms of
PFLP didn't. Because a lot of they left. Huh. The PFLP.
Oh,
left
yeah.
The PFLP. Yeah.
Yeah, and so did the DFLP.
No, they're still in it. In fact, they're still in the leadership.
Yeah, no. You're right. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking about my buddies. But because there was a rift in the DFLP. There was a rift
about this, and now they are completely clear and oppose Oslo also. But I think the thing about it was also supposed to, the Palestinian Authority is not a governmental body in the same sense. It's not who's supposed to be represented at the United Nations. It's supposed to be the PLO, which is supposed to be all factions. But Abbas,
Riyad Mansour is DFLP. The guy at the UN is still DFLP. It's kind of like a carrot, you know.
He only has a certain amount of power, and the problem is that Abbas is still the head of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO. And so what this does is, you know, the DFLP is fighting now to get, because they'd like, since we have this structure in place, for it to become, again, genuinely the sole representative of the Palestinian people. Right now, it's being represented by someone who would like to destroy the liberation movements.
Well, what you said about what's his name?
Abbas.
No. About I can't. His name is escaping me now. The leader of the PFLP that was in prison.
Ahmed Sadat.
Yeah, who imprisoned Ahmed Sadat?
The PA. For Israel.
So Eclectic Radical, like I've compared the PA and Mahmoud Abbas with, if you know history, Marshal Pétain and the Vichy. It's a government. Yeah, it's a government of collaboration.
Since we use the word apartheid, I will use a word straight from apartheid. It's a Bantustan.
That's right.
So in the beginning, it represents the colonial control of the system and is subordinate to its colonial overlords.
Absolutely, and so the people that were looking at it right there in 1993 could see the roots of that, of those, and the Batrustans and then just like theoretically about Machiavelli and dividing and conquering the Palestinian people, and that's when you have like the support of Hamas from the Israeli government, right? Like or the sort of like nascent support of allowing monies to be funneled to Hamas because they wanted to divide and conquer, you know. And Hamas originally, the leadership were in the West Bank and they were part of the PLO. Yeah. And then they saw the corruption, right? And then they got into their own thing and started their own thing. And then,
Well, they realized, and this is the credit you have to give the leadership of Hamas, whatever you think of their ideology. They realized that the PLO had made agreements that had essentially abandoned its legitimacy as a revolutionary organization.
That's absolutely right.
And also, you said whatever you think of their ideology. People comment on their ideology at a very particular time.
Yes.
With a certain cultural kind of stuff going on in the Middle East.
Yes.
And they do not read their 2017 constitution and documents about what they're about. Well, in which case, you know, still, if you don't
they're still quoting a mistranslation of a Hamas charter that doesn't exist anymore.
Right. And where they're not. And so I also, you know, they're not my cup of tea, but that's irrelevant.
Well, and it's really important to understand that it's exactly that sort of micro-analysis of Hamas ideology that justifies people talking about how wars are necessary to liberate women, or wars are necessary to save queer people. And those are the first people killed in wars, is anybody who's marginalized, because the most dangerous people on all sides with the worst intentions all target the marginalized people first.
Right.
Well, I don't know if you've heard, they've stopped now funding to UNRWA, which is the largest.
Yes.
The largest.
And they did it an hour after the decision came down. It took them an hour, a whole hour. That's just wow.
Right. This was clearly planned. And what also has come out is that
if I can say very quickly, if you didn't think the empire was out to get you, You know,
now you would.
Like everything is right there, man. It's right there.
Right.
You know, we will starve you. We will starve you. You know.
And why are they starving them? They're starving them because, so what we were talking about, Paul, before you were on, was with UNRWA, I talked about its origins, its connection to the partition plan, and the way in which it's really, you can't think about it without also thinking about the partition plan, the creation by the United Nations of these refugees, and the right to return. Because the whole idea was it would only exist until Israel fulfilled the requirements of being a member of the UN, which was give Palestinians a state on the partition plan, give them the right to return or compensation, and keep Jerusalem the same. So that the issue really brings the whole issue down to the wire of the Nakba. It's truly a second Nakba. But what the point that he was bringing up then was the timing on it, and what that, you know, it's not unusual for them to call people Hamas, but what has just come out, which I found fascinating in a very odd way actually, is that the intelligence that they say they had, that was the basis on which they decided that these 12 people who worked for this organization of 30,000 needed to be immediately fired, which is an injustice, and they should be immediately reinstalled, and that therefore they were going to be tried in an independent thing. And meanwhile, the U.S. anyway, even though they took those steps, which I think were horrible, to tell you the truth, they should not have been fired. I'll explain why in a minute, but then the U.S. took the steps right then at the day after the court. This was their sounding the message that, no, we are in charge of the plan for the Middle East. We are in charge of this war, and of how it happens or not. We are not going to allow interference by the court. We have the power, and we are now showing you that. And we are, you know, and the same thing, you know, they had a response to the Houthis, because no, you can't say we're not letting Israeli ships go.
And Joe Biden gave it away on national television when a reporter asks, is this bombing effective? And Joe Biden says, well, what do you mean by effective? Is it stopping the Houthis? Well, no, but it's going to continue anyway.
Right. Now, wait, the thing I want to say about the UNRWA thing is what's now come out is the intelligence. We're starting to find out the intelligence is turning out to be from, do you remember those horrid pictures of guys who are stripped down to their undies and all sitting around after having been in a camp?
I do.
My friend's brother was one of those guys.
And
my friend's brother was one of those guys. Yep.
And he's not a member of the resistance, right?
No, he's a grocer.
Unfortunately, right? Because we would like.
No. I mean, I don't mean to justify either way, but the guy's a grocer.
Well,
no,
he's
like the least politically.
Some were doctors. Yeah, some were doctors. So, but just like Paul jumped right when we said it, what happened when that happened is so many Palestinians knew someone there, and who they were. And they were.
It's like I don't know, Eclectic Radical, if you've ever been to Palestine, but if you go like the airport, right, which is built like near where my dad was born in Jaffa, but the airport is built in Lud. If you know George Habash.
I know who George Habash is.
Yeah, George Habash. That was his hometown.
Yes,
was Lud where the airport was built, and. But they always ask you, and I write it in one of my poems, that they always ask you when you're leaving, did you meet with Arabs? There's always a question, did you meet with... So, like, I don't know if I've ever said it, but in my mind, you know, like, you think, so, well, of course I did, because
I was visiting Palestine. Of course I know.
Now, what I was saying about this, because this is about the intelligence and the agency we're talking about. So, those guys that were then taken out of Gaza, and we didn't know where they were taken, remember? The intelligence we're talking about came from torturing them.
Of course.
Now we haven't been able to prove that it was torture, of course, but it's by Shin Bet in interrogation.
I mean,
well, they tortured.
So maybe I'm being skeptical here. I understand that there's a higher legal threshold of proof, but I mean, the pictures that I saw on the internet looked like proof of torture to me.
Right. Well, and here's the thing.
Well, I mean, the fact that they were stripped down, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and that they were blindfolded and
yes,
yeah, no, and they were
that people were identifying members of the group as journalists and grocers and folks who had nothing whatsoever to do with the resistance.
Well, and this group of people, right, is the group on which the Shin Bet. Now we didn't know that. They could have done the usual Israeli, which could have used torture too, but it's sometimes they don't. Shin Bet is another story, and so the Shin Bet extracted information about these people who were a problem from this group of men, and that is the information that they then gave to UNRWA, and is the basis on which they fired those.
No,
8 or 12 guys. Now, isn't that stunning? I mean, that's just
what's really funny about that is I am a student. Well, not student. I am a fan, sadly, of Cold War spy fiction. I can't help it. It's something that was around all over the place when I grew up. It was an aesthetic. There's lots of fiction out there. It's impossible not to consume.
Jean Le Carré? Or is
that not so much? No, Jean Le Carré is boring. Jean Le Carré is boring. That's the whole thing. Nobody wants to read a realistic spy novel.
But isn't this fascinating? You know, it's not unusual, but so it was possible to me in my mind that they didn't even have intelligence. But
the reason I mentioned the Cold War spy fiction though is because one of the first things they say in these reactionary stories that justify the colonial oppressor is you can't trust information from torture, because after you torture somebody a while, they tell you whatever they think you want to hear.
Right.
Well, there's no one. I don't mean to. Yeah, I don't mean.
This is something that the bad guys knew.
Yeah, well, I don't want to make this too easy, but at the end of the day, like, nobody is telling Israel, like, we see that you're abusive and you want to kill all these people, or you want to inflict the most harm so that people will not come back. And there's no checks and balances at all. Right. So people got excited about the international court, and I understand all that. But to me, like, as a Palestinian, I look at our own resistance and say, what can we do? And also then from the beginning, because even the transition program, and that's how the two-state solution started, with the transition program, what about the progressive elements in Israel itself? What about radical and well, I mean, they're still there, but because there's a state of fascism now and fear. Well, they're still there. I need
to be harsher here than I usually would be about progressives in other countries. Because if we were talking about Iran, I would say listen to Iranian communists more. But because we're talking about Israel, I have to say that the Israeli left has dissipated itself. We're in it.
Well, you could argue the same thing, yeah. Because I'm also
everywhere. The left everywhere has dissipated.
No, but you could also say the same. Because I always make the thing, and a lot of Palestinians don't want to do that when they live in America, because you're living under, the enemy lines. But
sure.
I've now come to understand, because I was born and raised in New York, but I moved to New Orleans 10 years ago, and living in the Deep South during MAGA now, I've understood like white privilege to be what it is, right? And I've had my life threatened by dudes with Confederate flags and the whole thing. But to me, the more pernicious thing is that the roots, like people with the comic books, like the origin story. The origin story of America is the same exact origin story as Israel.
Yes, it is.
So when people argue and you want people patronize them, well, you have to understand the geopolitical reason because of the support Israel and the U.S. Right. It's not that. It's the same country.
It's this, yeah.
So in history, you had like Rome and Byzantium. Israel is the satellite of the American Empire.
Well, you look at the model. The U.S. model was the model that was used in Rhodesia. It was the model that was used in South Africa. It was the model that was used in Australia. It's the model that's used in Canada eventually. It's the model in Israel. You replace the local population as much as possible with new people. The reason white supremacists go on about replacement theory is because they're telling on themselves that's what the white supremacists did.
Yeah. Yeah. So eclectic radical. I didn't mean to hijack your point, but when we're talking about going back to the thing about the left in Israel, and again, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it, but because to me, like, it's not that when America stops aiding Israel, it's going to change. It's when, however, they're silent now, or they're heartbroken, or they're not organized in Israel, but there is a population that doesn't just want peace, but wants cohabitation, and doesn't want the subjugation of another people. There are people that there are, right? So, but for us now as Palestinians, like, I'm saying this because we're having a discussion, right? But my thing is more now. It's like, we have to preserve our population because we're dying. Right.
The best example I can make is I'm not necessarily talking about every member of these organizations on the ground, but the leadership of Meretz, to single out one portion of the Israeli progressive left. The international leadership of Meretz has been pushing what is indistinguishable from a Likud line on the October 7th events.
Yeah, they often are like that, and they also have a history of which isn't surprising under colonialism, of betrayals. I mean, even the Palestinian groups that tend to work more with the Israeli left, they're the ones who tended to be like Gong Ho Oslo, even if they now kind of but now they'll just say it was a problem because it wasn't implemented properly. That would be like the Palestinian People's Party. And they tend to sort of view it as like they want two states, one that they run and one that's like run by Maki. So that's ridiculous. That's not dealing with the refugee issue at all, right? So that they actually fit the model. But there's another group within Israel, woman, Jude. You can look up Jude Leimberg, I believe, on Facebook. And she's in a group called Looking the Occupation in the Face.
Now that I like.
They go onto occupied land. And they go onto the occupied land, and you can see, because she has all of her videos where we can download any of them, and they go into the occupied territories and they say, look, this is that you can watch. Here's what the settlers are doing, and you can literally watch. Well,
they're also individuals doing, and there are individuals doing works like that, like Jeff Halper, who's from Minnesota, Jewish fellow who went, but he's like totally radical. Michelle Warshawski of Beth Salem, but what I'm saying, the correlation is that where was the American left or anti-war movement after September? I was in New York September 11th. There wasn't one American voice that stood up and said, "Don't go to Afghanistan." I can't even recall. Can you? Like, do you know?
Barbara Lee.
There was
Barbara Lee.
Say it again.
Well, there was more than Barbara Lee.
No, I know there was more than Barbara Lee, but in the political establishment, there was Barbara Lee, and that was it. Right. As far as the political establishment.
There were a lot. Most of the left was against that. We did stand.
Now, the
left. Yes. Yeah. The left.
Now there were, and then 2 years later, we had like 1 million people marching at the UN.
But what they didn't stand up for is what was actually happening in the Palestinian and particularly broader Arab American communities.
Yeah.
After 9/11 and the attacks that were happening with us and the framings, they had no interest.
And the police crack down on anybody they suspected of being Arab or Muslim, or any organization with any Arab or Muslim ties as potentially being linked to terrorism, which was just
right. Well,
ridiculous.
And at the time, I was the co-chair of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee in Albany when they went in and they framed a imam who was like, both him and his family, when we talked to them, they didn't even think they needed our help because this was America.
Yeah.
And he would and the truth they would never. And in fact, he's still in prison. So the point is that
where in Guantanamo?
No, he's not in Guantanamo. He's in the States somewhere. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, people still attack relatively ordinary, squishy liberal Democrats as being horrible people for having appeared at a CARE event.
Right.
Council on American Islamic Relations.
Right. But so I think one of the issues here that we're coming to very quickly now is, so we do have to use the verdict of the court.
Yes.
Because now every single thing that Israel does is not just the horror it is, but it's also a violation
of a court order.
The court order.
Contempt of court.
And we need, well, there isn't contempt of court in the international sphere, but
but that's a nice, good, clear euphemism since we don't care so much about the legalism as organizing.
But that doesn't have power. The actions they're doing are violations of the order.
They are contemptuous.
In order for, and here's what it matters, in order for the court to maintain its legitimacy when there's this much publicity on it, not because they care,
but because of the publicity and pressure.
They have to deal with the fact that Israel is both just flouting and doing these horrible things now.
Yeah, no, but I agree with that they're thinking about that. But then I think it also exposes the U.S. and Israel as not caring,
Well, I think it's tremendously important, if nothing else, to focus on the three basic takeaways of the final verdict, which is that, number one, South Africa has standing to bring charges against Israel for a genocide within what the world considers Israel's borders. That's important. It's really important that country A can bring genocide charges against country B and has standing to do so.
That's right.
That's very important. Even if we don't really believe in international law being real right now, it's very important to understand that idea of a precedent. Two, and this is equally important, I was going to say this earlier, but now is a good time. They said that South Africa has a plausible case.
Correct.
Now you have to understand that judges saying a prosecution is plausible is up there with theoretical physicists saying a theory is likely. It sounds like it's not a huge endorsement, but they're actually saying there really is a case here.
Well, I would correct that a bit. I don't think there. Wait. On the international law thing. Okay, and then let me go back. It's not true.
The third point is that Israel's request for a dismissal was thrown out.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So Israel lost that, but here's the thing: no, they are not saying that. And that's like a thing Lefter's saying, which is above our wildest dreams. What it means is that the evidence that they gave had to be something pretty bad. Yes. But not that it was that they think it's probably genocide.
Well, I didn't say that they think it's probably genocide. So this is where it gets into the tricky language here.
It's plausible that there is a case. Yes. Very often that does not, even when they get provisional measures, end up being a case of genocide in the end. So let's be really clear on that, because otherwise we're giving the court and this way more credit. A number of the people, like somebody posted what the German judge explained about why he took the stand voting for all the provisional measures. And none of it had to do with believing they were doing a genocide.
Yeah.
It all had to do with incitement and not acting on it. it justified him to agree to all of it. So, I mean, we're not as far along as you might think, but it is a big deal for the reasons you said. It's a big deal because instead of them saying there's no basis for it all, they said, no, when there's a huge basis, here's what it is. It does. And they said Palestinian lives matter in talking about the number of people that were killed.
I also think it's important that it was South Africa, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because South Africa like beat what we're
who knows more about apartheid than South Africa?
Absolutely.
Right, but it's not just South Africa. Like I said, it's also Nicaragua is one, and the countries that are all coming together, all the non-supporters of the U.S. and all the former colonies, but also Iran and China and Russia, everybody who is not part of U.S. imperialism's coalition is on the other side. Those are not people this law is supposed to serve. So there is a challenge on that level. My fear.
So our struggle, because it's two-pronged, right?
Let me just say this:
apartheid, but it's also indigenous people,
right? And my
question,
let me say it. So my question on the court thing again is: there's no question that there's a West versus the rest of us dynamic here, and that's the main thing how it's going to play out. But it is going to play out again in the United Nations, and the question is what that's going to mean in terms of the Palestinians. Right, because they are going to be trying to make deals like they've done before now to resolve it. So that's all. Go ahead, Paul, because then what you're going to say then is perfect. But I wanted to keep it clear that our current struggle is the court is going to be trying to set up either a non-state state, a demilitarized quote Palestinian state, putting the people who have been total collaborators and not for liberation in charge of the state.
Let's note that even the two-state solution opposition in Israel is completely unwilling to give up control of the borders, which means that they're not really for two states.
No.
Oh, go ahead, Paul. I wanted to make clear that the issues you're saying matter.
I would say, because I think sometimes it's forgotten that our struggle is always like it's two-pronged. It's indigenous people wanting to go back to the land, but it's also against apartheid, right? And so
Well, remember, it is two-pronged because you've got the civil and the literal physical struggle, but it's also very much the same thing, because apartheid is the system used to alienate people from their land and to keep them away from their new rulers and in their place.
Sure, but that's what I meant about going back to the first Intifada about non-participation.
Yes.
Right. So because I'm always reticent, and I understand people do, but after 2000 they used the second Intifada. Right. But the whole thing is that I don't think there's ever been that much in Palestinian society, in ancestral Palestine, as much non-participation as there was during the first Intifada from 1987 to 1993. And who stopped the first Intifada was not Israel or America. It was Fatah. It was Arafat who said stop.
Arafat
we got a good
who
deal.
said we need the peace before justice mistake.
Abu Ammar, And then he goes back from his mansion, his palace in Tunisia, and he builds one in Ramallah, right? Like we're like the only country that doesn't have a country but had a presidential palace, right? And then he did a business deal with an Austrian company or something, and they built this big horrendous casino in Jericho, like one of the oldest cities in the world, right?
Yeah.
So when they challenged him and they said, well, the Palestinian population is more than 90% Muslim, and Muslims are not allowed to gamble, right? He said, well, they can work there, but they can't play. So then again, you have this mentality of corruption and colonization.
Let's let's not forget that one of the core members of the U.S. Order for the Middle East is the United Arab Emirates, which is the country where all the rich Muslims go to not follow the rules.
Yeah, I want to get back to, though, that the Palestinian movement itself is a liberation movement.
Yes.
I think one of the problems right now is that most of the people who are on the left and active, some really do get occupation and stuff like that, but a lot get the need for ceasefire and for things to be okay and all of this, and they think Hamas is terrible. They don't know, they actually don't know anything, but they buy the lines about what happened and the various things. So, and the issue really is that what's going to come down now is whether or not in whatever resolution they come up with, besides ending genocide at some point, are they going to actually support the right of self-determination of the Palestinians to define their own struggle and their own government?
Well, and the answer is the tricky part, because Hamas is used as a dog whistle to divide and conquer. When Israel says Hamas, they mean Palestinians in general. They're not actually saying, talking about Hamas.
Well, they mean any Palestinian that resists.
Exactly.
And in any way.
Yes.
In any way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But when they talk about Hamas fighters, they mean all the resistance.
Yes. And any resistance is
any resistance is terrorism to the occupiers.
Absolutely.
Right. And the thing is that Israel's desire now to get rid of UNRWA and have it disappear, they've always been against it. And the thing is, these organizations do a lot of good, and right now they're really needed. But also the fact that they fired these 12 based on Israeli propaganda. We've had other cases happen where there was accusations and where the Palestinians that they accused, they proved to be fine.
Yeah.
So it's so that when
this is the same. The Hezbollah, the Israeli propaganda machine. This is the same office that dummied up documents in 1982 and told the Lebanese Christians that it was the PLO that killed the president of Bashir Ismail, who was on the CIA payroll, and that's how Sabra and Shatila started, right? Like the massacres of the camp Sabra and Shatila were because Sharon and these other people dummied up documents. They do this all the time. I'm not saying it's true or not true, but I'm saying that part of their playbook is to lie, because at the end of the day, they want to starve us out.
The person who's heading the UNRWA, the problem is collaboration in order to survive. And so what he does is, and that the Palestinians in the statements from the DFLP and the statements from the PFLP all called them out and said, look, you need to rehire those guys and you need to stop this, because that they've been trying to get rid of you, you fool. Why you may be happy for them to use you, but it's not going to end well for you or for the organization. And you're winding, and of course they're going to turn around the next day after you take every move to satisfy them and do what they want, which is say we're eliminating funding and use this as an excuse. So that they need to say, no, we're not firing them. We're going to wait for evidence. And right now we're more concerned with the genocide. And then we'll try them when it's time. No one would say in the middle of the Holocaust, when you had some escaped people from a concentration camp accused of killing some people on the end, that there should be the trial of them. A lot of them would say ever, but certainly not right then. Before.
In fact, they made a movie in which the people fighting back in the Warsaw Ghetto against the Nazis are the heroes.
Right.
Now, if we can make a movie in which the folks fighting back against the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto are heroes, why can't we understand that the people fighting against the liquidation of the Gaza Ghetto are heroes?
And the West Bank.
Yeah. Yes, and the West Bank. Yeah. But I single out Gaza in this case because Gaza has been specifically singled out in that way. But it's true. And you're right for mentioning it, because the division of Gaza and the West Bank in the media is like the using Hamas as a dog whistle. It's all part of this same demonization of any resistance to the occupation.
Well, you said it before about Bantustans, right? So it's seen as Bantustan, but from the oppressor's point of view, we're all the same. We're all Palestinians.
Yeah.
Right. But then they divide. You got this within the West Bank, like Hebron, or we call El Khalil, right? Hebron is totally different than Ramallah, totally different. You know, because the funding isn't there, and the relationship, you know, so
everything is different, and they use that difference, of course, like the oppressor always does, to try to create problems. And you know, that's why they need to divide even the West Bank.
Renee, even what you were saying now about the PFLP and DFLP getting on the guy from UNRWA, right, and saying don't succumb to this. And I'm not saying they're not right to say that, but it's all these like thing, and the guy has like, and I'm not making excuses for him, but he literally has a gun to his head, right? And he's got the guy from UNRWA, right? And he's got starving people.
Well,
right?
what's interesting is officially Israel is not his boss. And so
no. I totally agree with you. I agree with you. But I'm saying that, but then there is a thing, because then again, it goes back to the thing about Israel and America. Then Israel says to America, stop the funding, and America stops the funding. And it's
and so the issue really is that the only things progressive right now, any bill, you can like use this one criteria for something's happening in the UN. Is this good or bad? Does it minimize or eliminate Israel and the US and the allies' input and maximize Palestinian self-determination, or does it not? That would be the issue. Perfect. Right? That's so that no matter what solutions they do, if Israel, if you want to get aid around, and the problem has been that they're not, as we talked about earlier, that they're not allowing it, then you have to take it out of Israel's hands.
I mean, and let's
well, it should never have been in their hands to begin with.
If we were to accept all of the fictions about the UN and the United States that people try to teach us in school, we would have to demand of our government, why is there not a police action to stop the genocide in Palestine? Why are we not sending a multinational coalition to protect Gaza and the West Bank from the IDF, the way we sent a multinational commission to South Korea to protect U.S. interests?
Right. I mean, clearly what you need, I mean, if we're going to get a real thing, it's going to be a protective force made up not of the U.S. and its allies, and it's going to be a complete lifting of the siege of Gaza, and it's going to be a ceasefire.
And the blockade.
And, well, that's what the siege means, the blockade. Well, and so.
Well, no, because there's been the blockade for almost 20 years, right?
Yes.
Well, that's the siege. When we say the siege, we're,
Well, yeah, no, but then there's different, like what Chomsky calls the mowing of the lawn, right? That sieges are...
Well, the mowing of the lawn is the attack.
Of the DSPC.
Yeah,
and
well, the siege is the attack.
So I'm going on the resistance's definition. They use siege, rather than blockade. Sometimes I use blockade, sometimes I use siege, but the resistance uses siege.
Well, both yeah.
So in the term of...
That has to be lifted, because Israel can't have any control, or there's no way we're going to be able to get anything done to actually help, even on just a humanitarian level. And neither can we allow the U.S. and Israel and Arab reactionary states to have the say over what Palestine's going to look like.
Exactly. And let's not pretend either. Let's not pretend either that even by the framework of Oslo, Israel is in violation of everything in Oslo that has to do with the settlements.
Well, and Oslo was supposed to end with Palestinian independence in 5 years. As far as the Palestinian movement is concerned, Oslo is completely off the table.
Yes.
Yeah. and it never was a good thing. Again, except there was only a PPP would disagree and say it was, and now it's not.
Yeah.
But no, Oslo was what allowed them to divide things up. And
yes.
the main thing is then the UN not acting. Now, in that sense, one of our members, who's a Palestinian woman who's a civil rights lawyer, her thing is that she was definitely on the side of the 100% against the decision. There are definitely Palestinians on both ends of that.
Yeah.
But and the reason for her as a lawyer was, what is an order supposed to do?
Yeah.
That the order is supposed to address the existing problem. And the problem is not just that this is happening, but since it is about it happening deliberately, and all of these attempts, like the head of the UN saying, we keep trying and Israel keeps denying 90% in. That's the problem. So it's not about Israel having to go back and follow their obligations under the Geneva Convention and make sure they give out the aid as it needs to be. It's about that Israel has an illegal blockade that's been going on for quite some time, that they're controlling everything. And as long as they're controlling it, there is no reason that we would be able to get in what's needed for the scale of the absolute disaster and catastrophe that is facing the people. We're not gonna get it in with Israel or the US in control of those processes. There's
they
no
can't be in control of those processes. And that's really what it comes down to. The control. Ultimately, the control of Israel's borders has to be taken away from Israel.
Right. And ultimately given completely to Palestine, but not ultimately the way we've said ultimately on that for like God knows how long. It's never happened. Right.
Yeah. But that's the whole thing, is you've got this idea that somehow, and this is why it always takes time. You have to understand a term from colonialism. It was very popular in the British Empire. Is the population ready for responsible government?
Right. Government that isn't going to hurt us.
Exactly. And that's what they mean. They mean a responsible government in a British colony during the days of the empire, as opposed to the Commonwealth, meant a government that looked like it could be considered independent and sovereign up to a point, and we could say we've devolved all authority to the local level, but really the government was run by white Englishmen and by members of the colonized people who thought like white Englishmen.
Right.
One of the more poignant subplots in the 4-part series of books that most Americans remember entirely as just the jewel in the crown because they just saw the BBC version, is how the whole life of an Indian man who essentially became a British person because of his experiences as a colonized individual was completely destroyed by returning to his home country and having to live as an Indian again.
Paul, you've talked about that a lot with me, about the essentialness of trying to get, in the diaspora and elsewhere, Palestinians to give up their identity.
What do you mean give up their identity?
Well, you talked a lot about how assimilation.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, you see this in New Orleans that there are Palestinians who come in. A lot of Palestinians, the Palestinian community here in Louisiana is predominantly from a specific place in Ramallah. And they left after Oslo because they were able to get visas and they weren't on the PA's tit, right? So, like, they weren't connected to the area because of the corruption. They had a hard time finding jobs in the West Bank. And so they decided to get visas and they came here. And so part of that, you don't want to begrudge anybody because I was born and raised here, but you don't want to begrudge anybody trying to do the best for their families, right? But once the Palestinian leaves Palestine, they are aiding and abetting ethnic cleansing, right? Like the whole point of Israel is to get rid of Palestinians.
Yes.
So once a Palestinian leaves, that helps the Israeli project. I'm not saying, that sounds very harsh, and I'm not saying that they're complicit in the thing, but I'm saying that it's more not about regular Palestinian people and people here. There's a lot of
there's this whole Hezbollah lie that there aren't Palestinians. They're all
predominantly Muslim here. So the big sort of community organized. Yeah.
Paul, we can't hear you.
You're breaking up.
You're there again. Okay.
We had an internet jump. We have probably had an internet burst somewhere.
Oh, isn't that interesting? I think
we can see and hear you again.
Okay.
We hear you. You're fine.
What were you saying?
Oh, now there's a lag.
Now he's frozen. He's frozen.
It's okay. Neither of us are frozen to each other, so we really think it's probably your computer.
He's out. Do you see him?
Yeah, very much. So we're having trouble keeping you on. I'm wondering if your machine needs you to talk. To try turning your video on and off, or try.
Yeah, sometimes video on and off does work.
Who? Me?
You. What happened to our person though?
Stop cam.
No, we're not stopping the cam. You're. Oh, I got it. And then on again. Yeah, if let's see, if I push stop cam, what happens? There we go. Stop cam. We're all out.
Stop cam turns you off. I stopped and restarted my cam to see if it was me. I was actually having an issue stopping and restarting. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I might have had something going on too.
I can hear her, but her photo is not up.
Now it is.
Her video is not up.
It may take another moment. I think there's a lag somewhere.
I'm there now.
Yep. I can see everyone now.
Yeah, what I was saying was that it's the Palestinian I was saying that it's the Palestinian leadership that haven't made return to the land central to the resistance.
And
they have now,
like activating Palestinians in America, and just bum rushing, so-called the fake state of Israel, and now just settling there.
Yes, I see what you mean. Basically, sort of organized immigration policy that the right always lies and says that somebody has for the U.S. Only really send Palestinians back.
Well, we need a program. I mean, there is a need for a program to invite Palestinians back, like there's now what they have with.
Well, I mean, there's this thing.
Jews get assistance going into Israel, whether or not they have any connection to the land. Jews get help with. They get. This
is what I was talking about when I was talking about Meretz's international leadership. Because regardless of what Meretz's policies have or have not been at various times within Israel, their international engagement with the Jewish diaspora has always been, you need to come here. And that's sort of not the right message.
Well, what Paul is suggesting is that needs to be the message to the people.
The Palestinians, I agree.
Paul, what you thinking?
Well, yeah. So there's this whole thing, like for the last 20 years, I guess, the boycott movement, and I know Noam Chomsky has been critical of it, and I'm not, because I always joke that I make better hummus than. And when you look at now, right,
Paul, could you do us a favor? Just turn off your video, but keep your sound for a minute so we can hear you, because what's happening is we're not getting clear sound, and I don't want you to keep getting interrupted. Is that possible for him to do?
Yeah, and there should be mute and stop cam options. The stop cam option turns off the video, but you can keep talking.
And that probably would make the sound come through regulars, and then
sometimes if the video is lagging, the sound will lag because the video is lagging. That's true.
So let's see if we can hear him. Ha-da-da.
Is still there, Paul?
Paul, make sure your mute button isn't.
He's not muted. I can see that he's not muted in this system.
That's weird.
I think he left the studio by accident or got dropped.
Yeah, I know this is one of his favorite things to talk on, is the thing about return.
Yeah,
so that's
it's important. And it almost sounds like, I get what he's saying. It almost sounds like we need a Palestinian anti-colonial version of the Zionist organization,
right?
Which I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I mean, that also is part of what the role the PLO is supposed to play, more of a role with that, of having people who are even in the diaspora be a part of it. And Paul could talk more about that because he was a member of the PLO.
Sure.
But and so I'm hesitant to keep talking on that when we have
understand.
But
well, this is where I'll talk a little bit about the population of Jordan a little bit, because a lot of Americans, they hear they don't really have a lot of knowledge to fight back against some of the Hezbollah propaganda along the lines of, well, there aren't any Palestinians. They're all Jordanians and Syrians and Egyptians.
Right.
And the fact is,
refugees.
Well,
there we go, Paul.
Before the creation of the Mandate of Palestine, what was then called the Transjordan wasn't very populated at all. When Abdullah was put in charge, as his first title was Emir of Transjordan. As Emir of Transjordan, almost all of his subjects were people who left the British Mandate and moved to Transjordan because they believed in the Hashemite revolution against the Ottoman Empire in the first place. So Jordan's population has always been Palestinian. There is no such thing as a Jordanian as being separate from a Palestinian, except in the terms of decolonialism and the effects of colonialism. And so you've got this overlaying of identities, and the Jordanian identity is one that is created by a nation that is a nation, but also serves a colonial interest to divide the Palestinians. Because a lot of what was being said early on in the very first phases of after the war is that the hardcore Zionists and their British American allies were saying, Jordan is your Palestinian Muslim state.
Right. And Palestine is, but not in Jordan. But also, I think that this is going to be a really interesting time then, because how to keep the focus on self-determination.
Yes.
At a time where, I mean, I know for me, I watch some of what's going on, and it's really hard not to be constantly traumatized. It's very difficult. And not to lose the whole meaning of...
I don't want to get into Finkelstein in this show, Eugene, but I agree with you.
Yeah,
and that's all I'll say.
I support BDS. I just don't think it's the only. I think sometimes they put the only solidarity thing.
Well,
you need sanctions. Hold on. Let me just say, I know I'm trying not to get into that.
Perfect.
We need boycott. We need sanctions. Absolutely. And we need states to actually hold Israel accountable by eliminating their relations to Israel, since it never fulfilled those requirements that we talked about in this program earlier before poll happened, and everything. We need them to do that. What they're doing instead right now with the UNRWA thing is the opposite. And this is going to be the fight that's going to be playing out right now. And it's only going to win if we keep the pressure on all courts. But I do think the general idea of what BDS is about is very important. And I find the sort of, getting into that kind of secularism around our movement, if it's the only or if it's no good, I find a waste of time. But yeah.
Eugene is getting into a series of what I consider cogent and direct criticisms of Finkelstein's general behavior, which I agree with, but don't want to distract from our topic. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Paul, I think, are you the one who told me about the events where he told the Palestinians was that you, that about Finkelstein telling Palestinians that it was wrong that they were representing the case instead of him? I heard it. Oh, it may have been one of my.
He said that to Jimmy Dore. He said that to Jimmy Dore on in an interview on Jimmy Dore's show.
Well, the point is,
I heard it from the other Renee, because he got into a thing with the other person she co-hosts with, Dr. Jared Ball, who is a Black academic who's serious about a lot of the liberation stuff, and who was very, very critical of the behavior that Eugene is talking about. But that takes us away from the question of centering the Palestinians. But yes, he did say that. That's what I was trying not to get into.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. I think he can't hear us still.
We can hear you. Go ahead and talk.
Yeah, I went out and I came back on. I don't know if it's better.
I think it's a little better.
We can hear you.
I can hear you. But there's a lag.
You're freezing. There's something with your internet. So that's why I was suggesting when you talk, turn off your video and just talk.
Getting better.
Okay. But if you turn off your video and talk.
Well, I don't know if you know, but Louisiana is Louisiana's a little backward.
Not on jazz. But okay.
I lived on the Tennessee-Virginia border. I understand what you're saying about New Orleans.
Well, New Orleans is a little different because New Orleans is very diverse as a port city.
Yes.
It's 61% Black.
Yes.
30% of Black families live under the poverty line. 30% of Black families live under the poverty line. It's the murder capital of the U.S. The thing about the Jazz is that one of the good things is that there's still music education. It's still part of the culture, but it's only a city of 390,000 people. There's a lot of immigrants, a lot of Palestinians, about 60 Palestinian restaurants. Not one advertises that they sell Palestinian food. Because after September 11th, there was it's still here, Mona's, a big Palestinian restaurant that was firebombed. There's an Iraqi guy, he owns a restaurant, but he doesn't call it Baghdad Cafe, he calls it Lebanon Cafe. Because the Lebanese are the kinder, gentler Arabs,
Oh man!
But in any case, what was I saying? Oh, so you know how people say, "Well, you should write your congressman about the ceasefire." You know who my congressman is? Steve Scalise.
Yeah, we know how Steve Scalise feels about all this.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the U.S. has made.
I literally.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know it, I hate to say something Democrats have said, but it's actually a good line in this. Democrats on liberal television will correctly remind you if you forget that Steve Scalise is the person who said he was just like David Duke except without the baggage.
Yeah. So, Paul, before you got kicked out 3 or 4 times here, you were talking about that you wish the Palestinian leadership had a program.
Yeah. So that's an interesting transition, and the Scalise thing is very interesting because the Scalise sort of like that touches a nerve to me because I believe his grandparents were immigrants from Sicily, right?
Yes.
So you have this thing like if you've read Frantz Fanon and Black Skin, White Mass and all of that a lot of Palestinians want to, when they get to America, right? You just want to like put your head down and work and make a success for your family. But I think with the genocide, at least to me personally, what it's sort of illuminated is that I don't think that Joe Biden is just an outlier. I think that the subjugation and now the erasure of my people are part of the plan. Because A, we're indigenous people, and 2, even though my family is like minority Catholic, but we're predominantly Muslim, right? So this is like from the Crusades, right? That there's so unless you're a Muslim with oil, right? like the Saudis or the Gulf state, even though Oman is like the kinder, more progressive Gulf, right? But I mean, look at what they do to Yemen, right?
Let's also not forget, however, that that Palestine is also the only place in the world where the supposedly pro-Christian U.S. government is supporting a military persecution of Christians.
Very well said.
And let's point out that one of the reasons the majority of Palestinians are Muslim now is based on demographic changes that come directly to the struggle against colonialism and the fact that a lot of the Christians have been killed.
Right, and Jews, yeah. There were Jewish
we were talking about
like when you talk about
the PLF and DLF. Well, Habash was a Christian,
right? PFLP and DFLP.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I was about to say that, and also the chairman of the DFLP, Naif Hawatma, is Greek Orthodox.
Although what's interesting is now the head is Muslim. The head of PFLP now is a Muslim.
No, I said that. I'm saying, but there's a tradition of, and there's also a tradition of even now, like people don't understand, like with Hamas, like Christians are working with Hamas. Christians are part of the thing, but they don't say this because again, it's the Machiavelli. They want to think. What I was saying though was that and again, this is very personal, and I haven't, politically organized on this point, but for years it's been like, oh, don't buy Israeli hummus, right? Like the sabra, right? And I always joke about that with like I make better hummus anyway, right? But the whole thing, and Chomsky talked about the BDS movement, that it's only effective if you have the 3 of them, right? So we have the boycott, right? And then we have some divestment, but we have no sanctions because in as much as we can say like the 3 of us, well, we're not going to buy Israeli products, but at the same time, then, go ahead.
My dream, since we're talking about sanctions, and this ties back into the UN decision, my dream is that we start seeing countries take a look at this court order. Obviously, it's going to start with more radical countries. And we start seeing countries sanction Israel and the U.S. and the UK.
And we have seen quite a number of countries.
I mean, do you think that's possible?
We've already seen quite a number of countries reject having relations with Israel.
Yemen's naval war Yemen's naval war in the Red Sea is, in a very real sense, an attempt to impose sanctions on Israel and countries that trade with them.
Right.
So yes, we're seeing that in a small way now with Yemen.
So yeah, so that's from my very limited perspective. That's my thing as a Palestinian.
Sanctions.
Where do you go now here, right? Yeah, well, sanction, but the sanction is the other country. I'm saying as a Palestinian, like right now, like for example, how am I going to pay my taxes? Like for example, am I going to participate in an economy that destroys my people? Literally.
This is the right question. This is the right question, and I hate to get away from the core subject.
About the hummus, but
this is the right question for people who support Black liberation, for people who support gay liberation, for people who, I mean, every liberation is we should be looking for how we can divest from the capitalist system. The book,
that's right.
The book, The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin, way back in the day, is all about divesting from the capitalist system and instead creating communities that can feed themselves.
Well, and that's what the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Movement did, is they set up alternative institutions that provided a direct contrast of power between what the government was doing and what the people would do. And I think we've seen that a bit now in Gaza when we look at the mutual aid stuff.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah. So what you're saying, Renee, and Eclectic Radical, that
Chris.
it's an alternative.
Yeah, my name's Chris. Sorry.
Right, and that's what I'm going back. Yeah, no. What's your name? Your name is Chris.
Yes, Chris.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chris. Yeah, so but that's what I was going back to. The that we have as Palestinians, we have a history of that. We did in from 1936 to 1939. The great boy. You know, my family was involved in that. The boycott and
the March of
Return
strike
from 1936 to. Yeah. So we have that, right? So it's not like we're just operating from what the hell are we gonna do, right? It's just that now because of Oslo, then our the thing we're struggling is not just outer things, but we're also struggling with I don't mean this to sound harsh, but traitors. Like to me, the PA are traitors.
Well,
Abbas is a traitor.
This is a good topic to raise too, because at some point, and I've seen this happen in lots of liberation movements with lots of different people. At some point, someone has to choose between becoming respectable and all the things that go with it, which can bring legitimacy to you and your cause, or maintaining the things that have made them effective at the cost of becoming respectable. And what we saw, for good or ill, was the leadership of Fatah making a decision with the Oslo Accords to become respectable under the opinion that becoming respectable would make Palestine respectable and give the Palestinian proto-state they believed that they were going to construct legitimacy.
What they believed they were going to construct. And
Chris, your analysis is
that's right.
Very good.
And because they made that trade for respectability, for effectiveness, and because they then immediately got into a shooting war with Hamas. I remember this very well in the 90s. The first suicide bombings did not target Israel. The first suicide bombings targeted the security forces of the PLA. The original fighting, the first suicide bombings were targeting the PLA, who were committing crimes against Palestinians who were resisting who thought they were resisting Israel, but the PLA thought they were resisting them.
PLA?
Palestinian, I'm sorry, not PLA, PA, Palestinian Authority. I'm adding an extra letter.
Well, and here's the thing. All of that, I'm sure the U.S. hand was also in that a lot.
Of course.
Agencies were in that a lot. That's kind of how it goes. I wouldn't sort of,
COINTELPRO.
This is always right. It's the equivalent
What's
of that.
I'm kidding.
Well, since you bring up.
No, he was kidding.
No, but Renee, since you bring up the U.S. being all over it,
right.
A perfect example is the leaders of the Black Panthers in Los Angeles were killed during a dispute that became violent with another Black group based in Los Angeles. Right. The founder.
And
that was deliberately stirred up by the LAPD and the FBI.
Always.
So this question, because I think about this question of like respectability, right? And I've lived here almost 10 years in the South. So like the good Arab or the good Palestinian, right? And now so we've done all that, and they're still genociding us, right?
Well, and what's more, once you become respectable, you lose access to all those non-respectable methods that you used to use that worked. Because respectable people can't do those things and remain respectable.
Well, I mean, when I look at... Okay, go ahead.
So can I tell a very quick story?
Please.
Go.
Okay, so like I said, I'm a writer. I've been a journalist. I'm a poet. So I see this thing on Facebook. It's a woman who's sort of a known Palestinian American, right? And she's based in Baltimore. She's a tenured professor of English at community college in Maryland. And she's written a couple of novels. Now her big novel about Palestinian American family or something just came out as the genocide is flaring, right? So you see, like she's the whole rigmarole of publicizing your book, and I think it's published by Harper, right? So there's a big thing for it, and I find it like so distasteful.
Even though there are multiple different imprints that are still out there, the sad fact is these days they're all published by Harper.
Yeah. So
there's maybe two publishing companies these days in America.
Yeah. So my point being, well, even so in that way, like that cultural hegemony, right? That you have this person, and it's also a person who organizes Palestinian American writers, because there's I think once every 2 years a Palestine Rights festival, right? And I think they had a University of Penn this past year, and she's one of the main organizers of that. And I don't, because I left the DFLP, but I've always been a leftist, and I don't partake in that because I joke like Palestinians in Palestine, when they travel to America, they become something different, right? And the whole thing about virtue signaling and saying, I'm boycotting and let's get together with other Palestinian writers. Mm-hmm. The test of legitimacy to me is when you promote your book or you're writing your book or whatever it is, does that make any sense to a starving kid in Gaza? And if you're going to sell the book as being a book about Palestinian life in America, is it part of our struggle as Palestinians, or are you just using the word Palestine and Palestinian to trade of otherness and exotic shit or whatever the fuck it is? You know what I'm saying? Excuse my New York language now. And to me, because if my personal goal is to say it again, okay,
swearing is allowed.
But yeah, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, so I'm always fighting. I'm fighting myself, man. It's a constant
I understand.
Struggle. It is a constant. Yeah, it's a constant struggle. So you know what I mean? Like I don't personally go and fight her or like I did a little jokey thing yesterday where and it's so stupid because it's just all virtual and it's not real. But she posted this thing about how they were publishing her playlist of the songs that she listened to when she was writing her book, and one of the songs was Wu-Tang Clan's cash rules everything around me, right? So I commented and I said, cash rules everything around me, another dollar bill, yo. Because that's she is selling Palestine now in a time when our children are being slaughtered. And I'm writing poetry and I've got a couple of things, but again, are you doing it as part of the revolution, or are you doing it for your own,
right? And I think it becomes
a famous writer.
Yeah. And it's a very big deal, because one of the few places where we see a lot of Palestine activism is universities. And yet those of us who are like I was when I was teaching, I'm not Palestinian, but I'm Arab American. Those of us who are active on Palestine and we're in the university and start taking a stand, while white anti-Zionists seem to keep their jobs for the most part, we don't.
Well, you can get away with almost anything if you're white, but if you're not white, it's much, much, much more difficult. Look at Mark Lamont Hill. How many years ago did he lose a CNN job?
But let me say again, my point about that, though, going back to
he's a clever guy, though. He's a survivor, that dude.
True.
But my point about that is that in academia, there's a certain way we present.
Yes.
That isn't what you would do if you were being informal and you were trying to organize a movement.
Yeah.
If you're doing a movement.
Well, do you know Stephen Salaita?
Oh, of course.
Yes. So Steve lost his job in Illinois. Because they found his name on a list of the boycott, and now he drives a bus, a school bus in like the DC area, but he still publishes, and actually he's the only person who published a book about, go ahead.
And the Palestinian who's the other Palestinian who I mentioned earlier, who teaches at a college, she lost 2 jobs. Which is part of why I'm not saying the name, and I'm just saying or where, sure. Because right now, it feels too dangerous.
Well, that
was
a funny thing. Like Edward Said always managed to the razor's edge, right?
But it's a new time. I think post 9/11 and after 9/11, it's a different world for this situation. But also that, when they present in academia, there's a very particular way that they want you to present that feels very comfortable to white people, and that doesn't really bring it right to the issue of the people who are every day struggling and with unbelievable loss and trauma, unbelievable living conditions every single day. And we talk as if that's just a theory. Right? And it's not. And we don't talk about trauma because it's a theory, and I think that does a lot of harm in a movement.
When you dehumanize people,
let's remember that there's no such thing as just a theory, because this comes back to what I was talking about when I was saying that sometimes language we would think of as weak is actually very strong in a professional sense. In terms of science, a theory is as close as you can possibly get to a fact.
Okay, so I don't care. I want stories. I want to know about the Palestinians. Sure. I don't care about that. That's the point. So the reason I just did that, I knew I could get away with that with you, Chris, but the reason I just did that is the issue, though. I don't want to know about theories and their relevance. I'm a philosopher. I can do that in any moment. If we wanted to, I could start talking. After all, I'm a phenomenological hermeneutic person with critical theory. I could start talking about language and stuff. No.
So this is this was my point about right of return. This was my point about right of return. That right of return has been we say inshallah, like a God willing, a hope, a goal, a dream, an idea. And there's actually an organization,
a demand, but not a project.
Not a project by the Palestinian movement.
It's not it's
a demand, but not a project.
It has not been a political. It has not been a political action, and it has not because listen, the PLO back in the day was getting like buku funding from a lot of different sources, the different factions, right? There was money to implement a plan to return Palestine there. There was money. And then if you say, well, but the borders are all controlled by Israel and such. Well, the borders during the British Mandate were controlled by the British, and the Zionist colonists still came in.
The Zionists, through the whole 1930s, the Zionists came illegally. Through all of World War II, the Zionists came illegally.
So during the Intifada, we knew one thing, that there were, it was called facts on the ground, that the Israelis wanted to change the facts on the ground, the demographics. And that's why the illegal settlements were a concerted, they were not accidental, they were a concerted effort to reclaim the damn land. Because it's always been about the land.
Jabotinsky, that's the guy. Zev Jabotinsky, the guy whose whole line of thinking Netanyahu inherited. His whole original plan was illegal settlements.
But right. I think that but the bigger point is that I don't think people have a picture of what it's like to walk through the area, or of the situation of even the people in the West Bank, even before this situation, which is where everything's highlighting it. And I guess it's the concretes of it that are so important.
I believe you're right.
So one of the reasons I really felt that the whole issue, which has been coming up because of the Israeli demands about hostages have to be returned, two things. First of all, the ICJ did not say that they have to do it by order. To be clear, the order only concerned Gaza.
Yeah,
they did say that it should. And they said it without, and the annoyance is they said it without saying, and all Palestinian prisoners should be returned. But I think, the thing about the prisoners movement and about when we saw the release that was, I think, helpful is you got a sense of real people and real suffering and real reconnection. And it wasn't this theory about numbers and what happens. It was about real people's lives and the impact. And we could see it.
And I know that you want to stay away from philosophy, but I can't help it here, because the very fact that we call the people that the Israeli government holds prisoners and the people that the Palestinian resistance holds hostages is another dog whistle.
And it's ridiculous because, it's confused. I think that area of it, especially in Israel, it's very complicated. But even in international law, since you're dealing with a people under siege who escape, it's very hard. It's very hard to say, and yet they're applying what they would apply between two nations. And it's confusing. And although the Geneva Convention does say occupied people have to follow it, but that's the Western stuff. But all you can do is take hostages, and as a result of that, you're going to be able to free some of your people that have been way longer and under torture.
If we're going to start quoting the Geneva Convention and being legalistic, the Geneva Convention says occupied people have to follow it, but it also says occupied people have a right to self-defense. Yes, including armed self-defense,
but they do say that within the armed self-defense, like you can't take hostages.
Yes, but the powers that be ignore the right to armed self-defense part of that entirely.
Totally. But going back to prisons, because I think the prison movement is what we haven't really talked about much on the show. I think it's so important. I mean, one of the nights when I called Paul, because I was really freaked out, is that someone who I've had the opportunity to meet, and I know the impact of this person on the movement, Khalida Jarrar, who's a leader of the PFLP, who was in the Palestinian legislature. And this is what a leader is. And I think this is what I want to talk about. It's the difference between getting up and doing an academic paper. And this woman is an academic. She has also done it. But what did she do? Well, when she was in prison, this is not like organizing in U.S. prisons. She organized women prisoners before there was such a thing as organizing in very many women prisoners. And she organized the women prisoners and taught so that they would get education. Palestinians are among the most educated people anywhere, so that they would be able to get degrees, and managed to pull it to get help from the UN and from all these other agencies to be able to.
The Palestinian diaspora within the Ottoman Empire actually was the same sort of.
I really want to stay on her.
I know.
I want to stay on her. See,
Let's do that.
Because this is what I'm talking about, though.
Yes.
Right? I hope you can get why I'm doing this.
I can.
This is what we're talking about. It's about someone real, a real person, a real leader of the Palestinian movement. She did this amazing piece of work that did all this with women in the middle of the craziness of an Israeli jail. When she was going to be freed, they denied her the right to go. It was like a month before she was supposed to be free. And it was, again, she was only being held because of being a member of the PFLP. And they then wouldn't let her see her daughter died. And it isn't directly, her daughter didn't die because of like something horrible in the occupation per se. Her daughter had died because of health, which is kind of related, because how do you keep your health in the middle of it, right? So
trauma again.
Right. Well, trauma and physical
and
trauma.
Physical stuff too, of course. But
so they didn't permit her to go out to see her daughter. Just pure viciousness.
But Renee, what's your point though?
I'm going. That's right. And then when she does get out, they keep pulling her back in. So it's not like she can go back to her family, right? They're constantly in this thing of her being pulled back out. Now, what happened now is in the middle of this. Not only are they attacking Gaza, but they decided to round people up from the West Bank. And she is one of the people they rounded up. And at the same time, they eliminated a law that used to mean that they had to be able to see a lawyer within like 2 months. Mm-hmm. Now they don't even get to see a lawyer. And so these families, these families have this amazing gap happening, right? And this is a norm in Palestinian life.
Yeah, so
people are just arrested constantly for no reason.
Yeah. So can I interject very, very quickly?
You can interject.
So that dude, that neoliberal Nicholas Kristof, from the New York Times, but I don't know, 15 years ago, he went and he said, well, it would be great if the Palestinians had a Gandhi or a thing like that. But the thing is about our people, we have like 50 Gandhis. And again, this is not to your own personal relationship with Randa, and I'm not diminishing at all, but you understand that it's part of a process because they know that her politics is for the people,
right? And
they know she's effective and she's good, but they've also done it, and again, not to minimize her, but they did it to Marwan Barghouti.
Well,
he's stayed in there. And they have him in.
Yeah, so I'm not saying you're doing this for me, but I'm saying just to focus on one person.
The Gandhi figure.
No, but
well, the Gandhi figure is the Intifada, it's the people.
Yes,
you know what I'm saying, and so we get stuck in this Western notion of, well, we're gonna go. This person is it, and that's what they want, and they want us to fall into morality.
When what they also want is to eliminate everyone effective.
Even
in this case, it was a legislator and an activist.
And also because she's a populist, because she's a leftist and she's a populist.
Right.
The American
down to earth thing we're talking about, right? She's not just the person. She's not George Habash. Let's put it that way, right? I love George Habash, but she is not George Habash.
Well, no, they persecuted Habash too, though.
Yeah, but no. What I'm saying is the difference about
they didn't let that guy have a kidney transplant when he was like 75.
Right. Everyone goes through that, but the point I'm making is that concrete, down to earth, with the peopleness characteristic, they don't want, because she can have a direct influence.
So
it looks like they don't want reporters.
I would suggest you all watch, what is it, Naila and the Uprising.
Oh yeah,
Just Vision. It's a film collective in Washington D.C. and it's a nonprofit, and they do these films on Palestine. One of them is Naila and the Uprising. It's only about like about an hour and 15 minutes. But it's a great depiction of the role of women in the Intifada.
Right.
And why? Because a lot of the men were in prison, and again, it's a question of like they always talk about American politics. It's the economy, stupid, right? And I think we've lost that. We lost the power of who we are. Like Palestinians here, if Palestinians in New Orleans stop the restaurants and things, we would affect something. But
I just want to say that the guys in prison are considered to be doing really hard work for the revolution. It is the studio of learning how to exist and resist the revolution. And
I didn't say anything opposite of that.
No, I know, but because we were just talking about the women while the guys were in prison, I know that a lot of people I don't think really get the degree to which I'm certainly not saying you, Paul, but I think I'm thinking about who's watching this, don't get the centrality of the movement for prisoners and of how imprisoning both young people and anyone who has any impact on the population in a concrete way, how central that is.
And we're good chess players. We're good chess players because the Israelis let you have chess in the prison. So we're very, very good chess players.
But yeah, it means that there's a movement from the prison that is so central in a way that, people talk here about how many African Americans are kept in prison, and that is true, but not like this. We're not talking about a matter of degree in any way. So
people
we're
are locked up for being related to people in Palestine.
Right.
Well, it's that thing. What is it? The administrative detention.
Administrative detention, yeah.
because as a poet and as an old journalist, I'm obsessed with language.
Yes.
You could create any sort of terminology. It's still it's still wrong.
Right.
And it's extrajudicious, but
Well, that's the thing. Administrative detention, you're saying right there, some bureaucrat made the decision to lock this person up. That's what administrative detention means. It's an extremely the very phrase should scare us.
Right. And
but it's also like in America, like the Patriot Act, right?
Yeah. Oh, so I can't help this. You mentioned the Patriot Act. I cannot help mention this because we are going to hear so much of the election. I was not even going to mention his name, but I can't help it now. The Comprehensive Counterterrorism Act of 1995 was written by Senator Joseph Robinette Biden at the request of President William Jefferson Clinton. And Congress would not pass it because they thought it was ridiculous and overbearing and a police state. And then September 11th happened, and they called it the Patriot Act, and it passed.
Wow.
And recently,
you can't make this shit up.
He put in actively to activate something so that you can contact
Obama's people. White father.
Well, Biden put this thing in that if there was an emergency, so that he can contact us on all of our cell phones and let us know if there was martial law.
So get rid of the cell phone.
Well, Biden, to be fair, Biden didn't put that in. That is part of, Biden did put that in as part of the Patriot Act sort of thing where the Amber Alerts and stuff like that too. That was part of the start too.
But he hadn't, but now he's effectuated.
Yeah, but and Trump was talking about that. And the same people who said it was just such a horrible idea when Trump was talking about it, ignore it when Biden talks about it. Which really tells you about all you need to know about our politics.
Right. There's fascism in both parties, not one. And the part of the thing is, I do think, in fairness, what the left argues, which I think is wrong, when they argue this, is some parts of the left argue that, we get more room to move with Biden. And the thing is, just in terms of democracy, I think
the lesser of two evils.
But
it's not lesser.
But the problem is, I'm not convinced of who I think it depends who the we is.
I'm glad you brought this up too, because I'm not going to name names, but a very prominent person in the U.S. anarchist movement, credits in Teen Vogue, has a podcast that's all about liberating people in America. Very, very serious organizer, someone I respect on multiple levels, said that she was supporting Biden in 2020 because it would be safer for us to organize. Trump was too much of a danger to our organization. We had to get rid of him. What was the first thing that happened when Biden was elected president? All the white liberals went home from the protests that were going on against the police. I know this because I heard it directly from my activist friends who were protesting in DC. The white liberals all went home. The same thing happened in Atlanta.
And what's going to happen when we get a ceasefire around Palestine is the white liberals
will declare victory.
Or they will push for a collaborationist solution against the Palestine movement, which is why I focus so much on our organization focuses so much on supporting the actual organizations of the Palestine liberation movement, because people aren't seeing it as a liberation movement. And part of the reason is, given the way the politics went, we've kicked out most of the representatives of these groups from the United States. At the time where I was active, they were our mentors. They were the people who were in the United States to organize us, to teach us about the issues. And, they were the mentors. Now, they can't really be here or be active or be public here. They have to hide. It's ridiculous. So we no longer have that kind of a presence of people who are real people, part of a liberation movement. And therefore, the movement, I think, gets caught more in sectarianism. And because we're not focused on what is being asked for, because on all of these questions we've debated right now, Hamas should be listened to too. Hamas is part of the coalition. What does Hamas and all of the say? They say we will return the hostages if all Palestinian prisoners are returned. But first of all, there must be a ceasefire, and third, the blockade or siege has to be lifted. They say siege. And that's the basis. Now, they originally just said there had to be a ceasefire. And then as it went on, they said, all for all, that's it. We're not going to play this game where you are arresting other people in order to, we can't.
Which is exactly what they did. They would let 30 people go and arrest another 300. Right. That's why I said, that's why I used the horrible term in a normal year when mentioning that they typically put 700 to 800 children in administrative detention. This is not a normal year, even by the gross standards of what the IDF does.
But so what they're saying is, so their positions on this stuff is very clear. When this UNRWA thing, like we're all looking at people and legal people and all of this crap, what's the Palestinian movement? What is the DFLP saying? What is the PFLP saying? They're saying, we are so glad that South Africa did this, and that the fact that it's shown as plausible is good. And what do we need to focus on? A couple of things. You need to focus on the issues of sanctions, eliminating ties, holding complicit the people who are complicit, not on like sending people to the ICC right now, because the ceasefire is primary and the lifting of the siege is primary. Those are the two things that are primary. And then in the background, they're always talking against support for the collaborationists and insisting on the united front of Palestinians as being the only ones to make a determination. And that's going to be a challenge, because even some of the really left people have this line of two-state isn't viable. Well, you know what? I don't care.
Well, and here's the thing.
If the Palestinian, why don't I care? I don't care. If the position that they've come to as a consensus, that at this point in the movement, their consensus is that we need the two-state solution, the right of return, the issue of Jerusalem, all of that in place. That's where we're going right now. Then that's where we have to go as a solidarity movement. And do we really think we're so much smarter than them that they don't realize that a Palestinian state sitting next to a Zionist state that the Zionist state is not going to really allow that to continue, right?
Well, it's like Cuba and America, right?
The way I see it is fairly simple. If the Palestinians want this two-state solution,
they get it.
as a people, that's their call.
Right.
Now, at the same time, if the Palestinians as a people don't want a two-state solution, that's also their call. The question, the thing that we often forget about is we need to remember that in the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, the Palestinians are the people who built the house and the Israelis are the home invaders. If the Palestinians are willing to share their house with the Israelis,
that's their
it's not my place to tell them not to. If they are not willing to share the house with the Israelis, it's not my place to tell them to share it.
So, Chris, that's 100%, right? So that's the thing you were saying before about the white liberals and Biden. After Biden, all the white liberals went home. Fuck the white liberals, right?
But it's important to understand that when this person that I was talking about said this, they were thinking in the terms of, well, Trump's Justice Department shot a guy here in Portland because he killed a Nazi defending himself and other protesters at a George Floyd protest. And Trump had him killed. Now, that made a big impression on a lot of us. And that's why you will never see me make any sort of pro-Trump argument ever. But at the same time, all these white liberals were protesting Trump. They were protesting the cops under Trump. They were protesting the court under Trump. They were protesting the government under Trump. When Biden won, they went home. Policy didn't actually change very much. If you want to talk about the border, where Republicans are saying the borders are open, Biden's actually toughened some of Trump's border provisions, not loosened.
Right.
Well,
and in terms
of
of
Obama, who deported like so many people,
and I know that
and eliminated my homeland, Syria.
And this same person is now refusing whatsoever to support Biden now, because they now understand with what's going on in Palestine and how Biden is handling it, that he really isn't any better for anyone supporting liberation.
He is for some people, but not for
supporting liberation. That's right.
Yeah.
And the liberation of one people is the liberation of all people.
But one of the differences about Arab Americans dealing with this now, both Palestinian and the rest of us, is that we all identify with Palestine, regardless of where we're from.
Yes.
In fact, a lot of us, when we came to America, lost most of our identity, except for support for Palestine. So if you go to Little Syria in New York, what united the different Arab peoples was the fight for Palestine. And one of the members of my group, who's Syrian, points out that when they were in schools and UNRWA and everything that was taught was about Palestine in Syria, even though she's Syrian, grew up in Syria, unlike me, who grew up here. And so when we have to confront something like being pressured now to vote for Biden because, oh, come on, the Muslim ban and the this and the that, what they seem to miss, and this was something that was pointed out really beautifully by the woman I mentioned in our group, is, we Palestinians, she said, we really have a longer view, and we're not fooled. We understand that you have to be steadfast in the cause, and we don't separate out ourselves from the rest of working people in the world. So the idea that working class, if it's primarily the elite and the white working class, then Biden will serve them better. In fact, it's because we are a settler colonialist society.
Yeah.
That's why it could happen. But if we want to look at fascism in the world, then those groups that are making the argument that Trump is fascism come already and Biden isn't, that's nonsense, because the world movement, the fascists know it's international. It's the consolidation of the worst elements of international capital and racial capitalism around the world in such a way that there's no room around the social and all these other life. So that when I look at this, I go, is it possible that there'd be a little more direct repression if I have Trump than Biden? I would say yes, it's possible. But guess what? It's just a little more time. It's not a difference. The difference is the fight for liberation, and it matters to me to do that at the expense of having this kind of a genocide against another Arab people.
Yeah,
it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and there's no illusion, that Biden.
Well, I'm gonna say, as a Palestinian liberationist, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if we can achieve what we want to achieve as long as there's an American empire.
Right.
And Trump, I was born and raised in Queens, New York, which is a Democratic hotbed. Yeah. I don't think I've ever voted for a Republican.
Right.
And like I voted for Ralph Nader twice, but well, my mom was Lebanese, so. but what I'm saying though is that Trump is gonna accelerate the downfall of the American empire.
Right.
More than Biden. Biden is going to be same old.
Well,
and
but
he's doing a good job right now.
Biden is doing a great job of accelerating. Yeah, I mean, Biden is as great an accelerationist as Trump at this moment. Biden has done more damage to the U.S. on the Palestine issue now than Trump did to the U.S. on the Palestine issue.
It's interesting.
He moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
It's interesting how personal stuff and one's own identity, like Biden as an old, neoliberal, white liberal, and the connection with whatever it is, him and Jews or something like this, that he went, and I told this Egyptian woman, and she didn't believe me. I said, because sometimes people just don't read, but he went to Israel in 2022, and he declared himself. He said, "I am a proud Zionist."
Well, so
yeah, yes.
So Biden is worth it. It's worth doing a show just about talking about how awful Biden is.
Go ahead.
So other people other people that are interested in racism or not, anti-racism, that when you say you're a Zionist, you're saying you are a racist. Well, Zionism is racism, right?
You tie that into what he said about Haiti. The world would not notice if Haiti sunk one day. If Haiti sunk into the ocean, it would not affect U.S. policy, were his exact words.
But the thing is, what is the resistance then, right?
Do you speak any Arabic, Chris?
No, I am sadly.
So listen to what I'm going to say now. Yachrebetak. Yachrebetak, that this is a curse, but I think it's all right to say, means I curse the guy's house. No, I wish for the destruction of the guy's house.
It's like what you used to see in the medieval stuff all the time when the caricatured Islamic characters said, "A pox on your houses."
Pretty much, yeah. Well, Yachrebetak, and it's funny because
having had that.
In English, you have to understand that in British English, a pox means syphilis. Yeah. So when someone says a pox on your houses in English,
too close for comfort here. But anyway, too much information.
Sorry.
Look, what we've got now is there is an international movement, and the U.S. is not in charge of it. Right? The fact that the Palestinians, in the middle of a genocide, could tell people you are going on strike. And within 3 days, you had major cities from Amman to Beirut to Jerusalem to every place, all these cities completely shut down. And that they don't do the American thing of, well, we have to build the union movement, even though there's a bureaucracy and like the union movement is the only place for a workers' movement. No, what does it mean to do a strike? It means that the workers, whether or not they have a recognized union. Now, I'm very for recognized unions, but whether or not, it means don't work. It means don't send your kid to school. Don't spend any money at all. Don't put anything into the system.
Shut it down.
Shut it down. And so they actually do that for a general strike, and they can do it for 3 days, and then they were told to do it again, and they did it again with major cities. I mean, we think we're more advanced and smarter.
We're not.
You know, and here we go. I mean, when you look at what they did, I posted the pictures of the places shut down and stuff, I was really interested to find that all the sort of normal leftists from the other thing, this was not a big deal to them or a major interest.
So, you know, I don't even know how many people know this, but during the period of time that the UAW was having their quote unquote stand-up strike, the Ferrari union in Italy got a 4-day work week, 4 days of work for 5 days of pay. I still don't know what they did to win that. Nobody does, because it's not been covered in the US media at all.
But the left wasn't even interested. And here's the point. The Palestinian resistance movement, the Palestinians are not just victims.
Yeah.
Right? And it's easy to say, oh,
Thank
I'm
you,
going to
Renee.
give some money.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to give some money. Yeah, I thought I'd just tell you you're not a victim. But no, seriously. So you know, it's not just like. So
Chris, can you tell she's a therapist?
No, therapists would never like the way I'm talking. But no, so
I'm all right. You're all right. You're also a refugee of academia.
I'm a refugee, but I'm out of it.
Can we tell Chris about the nunnery, or is that a secret?
He knows I'm an ex-nun, I think.
Yeah, she's
you mentioned that. Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah, she fled a lot of. That's why we love her, because she's a refugee from a lot of different.
Yeah, you're a refugee from a lot of things too. You're but no, seriously. So look. What I'm saying is, it's easy to say, to be horrified by what's happening. It's so easy to be horrified. And it's so easy. And when Americans are horrified, though, they're patronizing or they're idolizing. Like they wouldn't have had that interaction Paul and I had, right? Because I'd have to be like this to him, or I'd have to be like, oh, honey, what do you need?
Yeah.
Right? We couldn't be actual comrades.
Yeah.
The left deals with Palestinian people.
That's totally right. That's totally
right. They're either victims and we have to help them, or anything they say is going to be true.
Now,
any individual, not the movement. Any individual.
I'm going to say this because for obvious reasons, I've had a certain amount of experience with this. It sounds like white saviorism.
Well, right. It's called colonialism.
Yeah, that too.
It's called Zionism.
Yes.
Right? That is white saviorism.
Yes.
And even though, I know the last time I talked a lot more like a therapist, right? Because we were talking about the grief that each people were feeling and how you process it. And so in that one, I had much more of that therapist feel about what I was saying than this one, which has just been kind of politics that way. But, seriously, this movement is a liberation movement. And that's what our movement doesn't get well enough, right? So that they don't have that sense. And part of what I think is important about the cases that we've been looking at in these courts, which are imperialist courts, is, first to see the South Africans there. Then when St. Vincent's and the Grenadines was the next place that actually filed. And then the next place to actually file after them was Nicaragua. My eyes teared up so bad. All I could do was sing the only thing I know in Spanish, and probably poorly. Adelante, marchemos, compañeros, avancemos su revolución.
But Daniel Ortega has changed a little bit.
Yes, but he also is doing. But they're under attack also. So
nobody ever stays perfect because people are human beings.
But these revolutions, no, because they're being attacked.
That too.
And they have to take some measures that they wouldn't do otherwise if they weren't under constant attack, which is what happened with the Contras. But Nicaragua is a whole nother story. But my point about Nicaragua is, and having been in the demonstrations and having sat with the people from Casa Nicaragua, who are the revolutionaries of the FSLN, just like with the Communist Party of South Africa and the ANC members.
My best friend here was Sandinista, so
right. So that having had all of these experiences of the movement, of them being a movement for liberation, and at a time when the world was seeing a general move overturning colonialism around the world and revolutions being successful. Now, when we're born in that culture, I actually believe a revolution can win because of that.
Certainly.
Right? But that's a very different experience than some of the people growing up today. And so I think it affects how their movement is, that they don't look at it as a liberation movement, right?
If you're my age,
which might
under
be
50.
Oh, older.
Between 40, I'm between 40 and 50. I'm 47. I'm Gen X. If you're my age, you grew up with the exception of the end of apartheid, you grew up with a lot of bad news and a lot of stuff that you thought was good news and hopeful at the time that ended up being bad. It's like everybody who was happy about the end of the Cold War when I was a kid kind of wishes the Cold War was back, just because, for one reason or another, regardless of which side they're on. Side of it they would be on.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, so right now, the rest is challenging the West.
Yes.
This whole model of U.S. supremacy is under a threat, and the core is the Palestine Liberation Movement. That's going to be the central force.
So, Chris, you were 10 years old in 1987?
I was 10 years old in 1987.
But you've studied the Intifada, right? Or you
read
about it? Yeah.
Yes. I am a history nerd.
Okay.
I am the sort of person who can tell you that the reason that the one thing that balkanized Arab groups around the world have in common is Palestinian rights is because Arab nationalism started in Palestine.
Well, nationalism.
Not 100%.
Nationalism and Palestine.
But in the Levant.
But the strongest supporters of the Greater Syria movement were in the intellectual sense were Palestinian writers.
Well,
all of the Greater Syria activists became Palestine activists in the 1920s and 1930s.
Right.
One of the main guys, Michel Aflaq, was a Christian from Syria.
Yes, baby.
Michel Aflaq. And then
we're almost done.
And then he ends up in Baghdad. Michel Aflaq, one of the founders of the Ba'ath movement,
right,
of the Arab socialist. We say in Arabic Wahda Wataniya, which means one country. So that's very interesting. Yeah,
right. PFLP has always been very strong on Arab nationalism. Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of it is too that with this fall, the West and the rest, there's another thing that's falling, which is the nation state.
Yes.
And what's interesting about that is, those of us who have roots in the Levant, we were all over the place.
Yeah.
And most of us have very mixed heritages.
Yes.
Unless if you were a Christian, you probably actually can trace that very easily. Otherwise, it can get complicated.
Well, that's my family. My dad's roots in Palestine are, I don't know, like maybe thousands of years, right? But from my mom's side, we're Lebanese Syrian, and so in Arabic we call that region, because the French call it the Levant, the British called it the Fertile Crescent, and really it was seen as Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, right? And in Arabic they called it the countries of Damascus, because Damascus was seen as the sort of municipal sort of capital of
Damascus. Damascus had been the capital of the region going back to ancient Rome and even further.
Yeah, that's right. Before the
Damascus was a big deal. I mean, heck, Damascus was a big deal in the biblical era that the Zionists make so much of.
But it's funny because poetically, when we say Balad Shams It means countries of Damascus, which means the Levant, right? That area.
Yeah.
But Shams is also sun. So it's like the what's that group? The Native American, the Rage Against the Machine, the people of the sun. We are the people of the sun, right? So
and there is a sense of being one people.
Yeah. So my mom was, like I said, Lebanese Syrian. She married my dad, not Palestinian. That was not problematic. But now, like Lebanon, especially with the sort of fascist politics of the Christians there, right? My family's Christian, but my grandfather was a judge.
Not the land style Christian.
Well, he was a judge and a prosecutor who was kind of the head of the FBI in Lebanon, and he hated the Christian politics because it was racist, and they were fascist. The guy who started it, the phalangist, Pierre Jmail, was a pharmacist who wanted Lebanon just for the Christians, and his son Bashir Jmail, who they killed, the Syrians killed him, was an agent of the CIA.
Right? There's not really a quote direct connection, but the term phalangism itself comes from Catholic Spain during the Spanish Civil War.
That's right.
And the phalangists were the ultra-Catholic fascists who actually thought Franco wasn't extreme enough.
So there's a film that what's her name? Vanessa Redgrave. You can find it online.
The Palestinian.
She made the Palestinian, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of halfway through it, she's interviewing, because she went to different camps in Lebanon. And at one point she interviewed Pierre Jmail, the founder of the Qatayid, the phalangists. And he's sitting there, he's got like a big poster thing, and he's talking, and he's singing the praises of the Nazis. And he's talking about how he was like a young athlete during the 1936 Olympics, and he went to Berlin, and how disciplined they were. And like I said, like my family from my mom's side were Lebanese Christian. Like my skin was just like, do you know what I mean? Like but this is the thing about, well, again, it comes to the Machiavelli thing, because it's the same gene pool. You know, but the whole thing about religion being used as a wedge, and because in 1948 the Lebanese were the first, they were a democracy before Israel. Israel was and the Lebanese invited the Palestinian refugees.
Yes.
And then what happened was, because of different things, racism stuff, the Palestinians then joined forces with other people that were poor, that were outside of, and it was the French that left it like that, you know.
Well, the way that Israelis always put it is, well, the PLO tried to take over Jordan and Lebanon, and that's not exactly what happened.
Not at all.
But that sense of being one people, and then of course of the Muslim world of being an ummah. But although you need to kind of challenge that, because not all Palestinians or people who would be part of the Arab nation would be part of the Muslim nation, and Hamas is getting better about that. They're now in their joint statements. They're, instead of saying just Arab, what used to be, you had PFLP saying our Arab people and them saying our Muslim nation and our Palestinian people. And now you have our Arab and Muslim nation and Palestinian people, which is kind of an expansion to recognize that, in fact, we're just talking about the people that are identifying with it.
Well,
but that kills the idea of nation states.
It does.
And it kills the idea, which is really the grounds of a lot of the international law and stuff. So it's interesting, because it's people who are in the anti-colonial struggle at the same time. The movement is actually questions, I think, the whole left idea that, why would we look at just Biden and them, to go back to that? Because we're looking at it from the point of view of this nation, as if that's the thing. We're going to start here. If you take the international
point of reference,
it's an international.
But it's interesting that now you say, like, Hamas has said this, but to me, like I said, in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in the DFLP, but the fact that I was a Christian was never an issue.
No.
Like, no one ever said you're less Palestinian or you're less of a member of the DFLP because you come from a Christian family. That wasn't even an issue. To the point, like we said before, George Habash was Christian, right? And and the leader of the DFLP was Christian. So
and if you want to really, and obviously he's not our favorite Palestinian cultural figure right now, but if you want to get right to it, heck, Arafat's wife was Christian and converted.
You want to hear something funny, Chris, about Facebook? I'm Facebook friends with his mother, with Arafat's mother-in-law. and she always likes my shit, and I always like bite my tongue because I always want to Ramonda Tawil. Now Ramonda was a
journalist. She's going to see this.
Well, Ramonda, no, because Ramonda kind of knows my family, and Ramonda was Arafat's. She was the Fatah's ambassador in France, and so in when Oslo was happening, like about a year before, they said, I already like he wasn't married. They said, well, you got to get married. So all of a sudden he marries, Ramonda's daughter, and she's one of my Facebook friends.
Yeah, but I mean this whole issue is that when we look at the struggle as a worldwide struggle, and not through the lens necessarily. We're looking at peoples and movements instead of race and nations.
Yes.
Because Arab Americans and race, I mean, as I've often said, if I may curse, is that we're really fucked up on race.
Yes.
We're really fucked up because, during segregation, you had really dark-skinned Egyptians shipped off to white schools.
Yeah.
In a different neighborhood. And you had really people lighter than me shipped off to black schools because we're Arab. So we're really a mess. There was also times where you couldn't be Palestinian here. It was bad. And so you had to be Syrian, even if you were Palestinian. And other times where you could be anything but Syrian.
Yeah.
But Renee, this goes back to... But Renee, goes back, and I agree with everything you've said.
Yeah.
But this goes back to what I was saying, specifically me as a Palestinian. Those are issues that are my issue right now. Is how can we return back to our land, and how can we be liberated there? So what my issue is here in New Orleans, and one of the big figures here in the Palestinian community. He's the accountant. He's like the mafia accountant of all of the Palestinian small businesses, right? He's like the main accountant, right? This guy named Taysir, and he went to LSU. So one day after another siege or attack against Gaza, like two years ago, my friend from the UNRWA came down to raise money, and we were in a car with the guy, the accountant, and he was saying about how. So this is like, I guess, a year after George Floyd, and he was saying about how he's been in Louisiana as a Palestinian for like 20 years, went to LSU. And that in all the time that he's lived here, he's never had trouble with the cops. Maybe a few times he had a headlight not working. Because he said, unlike some other people, and he was talking about black people, he said, unlike some other people, I know how to handle cops, right? And it's like, and I'm in the back, like sort of like, what the fuck, bro? Because our struggle is the black struggle, and it's the indigenous struggle, and it's the struggle of all people in struggle. And here's a guy trying to say, well, you know what? I'm better than them. And so, bro, you can call yourself the Palestinian thing and stuff. You know what? It's Vichy. It's Vichy. But
I think also, like, we don't have, America is based on a black-white scale.
And ADC, by the way, has not always been good about Palestine.
Well,
because ADC tries to float in assimilation and integration, and then the guy Zogby, right? And I think Zogby is part Palestinian, and it's all like neoliberal, this neoliberal shit. Right. And again, I don't want to say, well, I'm radical and this and that. Right. But he says it only to a point. He never says, "Fuck Zionism, give me my land back," because he can't, because he's a lobbyist in Washington.
Right, and that whole dynamic of professionalism, but also for the young activists.
Chris, when someone says no offense, be prepared to be offended.
Of course.
But a lot of young activists now.
And thank you for this. I don't always feel like I'm in safe spaces, especially these days. But I feel like this is very much a safe space. I appreciate it.
That's my goal. I want people to be able to talk.
Yeah, because Renee told me about it yesterday, and for whatever reason, like I trust her as a comrade. I was like, listen, yeah, whatever, I'm down, But there's always this like almost this Semitic thing, like the shoe is gonna drop,
Do you know how I invited him?
How?
Did I tell him what I said to you? I think it was funny.
Oh, she kind of said, well, do you want to be the Palestinian token?
Yeah, no. I said something even worse. Do you want to be the Palestinian that legitimates our organization and me? Because that is what now and the joke
it's like the white liberal writers in the 60s hanging out with the black Panthers.
What they do, the left now.
I didn't wear my black turtleneck.
But what they do is
my DFLP button and my keffiyeh.
Right. They bring Palestinians or even Arabs and they have them speak at a rally.
It's tokenism.
But they don't include.
But the whole thing, and Chris was talking about this before, the whole thing about tokenism or whatnot, everything is a question of power and primacy. And who gets to choose what they choose for their lives. Whatever it is.
And the issue for the movement again is when you say you want a Palestinian speaker, you want to have the Palestinian and the Arab perspective on your agenda. So, for example, we still have the meat of the raw comes after the butt. Now, kind of is the butt.
Yes.
It's not. The butt is almost not a butt, but it's a.
Well,
butt.
The phrase that I'm familiar with is nothing before the word butt counts.
Well, what happens is they want it, and then what they do is they don't want the input. And a big example of that is we still have mostly Palestinian, but also others, Arab Americans and Arab Canadians and Arab British in Gaza, suffering through the famine and everything that they are. They have only recently let a few people out that are really famous that recently got out with their families. And Biden has made no real efforts to get us out. He's focused on the hostages. So, when Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans say, why in the world would we go vote for Biden? He's basically said, we don't count. He gave 3 cruise ships to get the Israelis, but for Arabs, we can't get out of there. And we're not hearing any reports because it's being controlled very carefully. They don't want to know about how many of us have been killed in the bombing by Americans fighting with the IDF.
Yes.
Who are dual Israeli
dual citizens, yes.
And they're not talking about their deaths either. Why? They want us to know very little about it. When it seeps out, they do.
Hey, I think I said this the last time. The IDF wants to use all this social media marketing to make us think of the IDF as a pretty 17-year-old girl.
Yeah. But so I think that, that's the other issue. But so that part of the problem, though, they're having is, so the left, which would say, so we have 1 or 2 organizations we acknowledge, and we'll have their leaders come and talk. But then when we make a strategy for either dealing with the international court or anything else, who do we go to? We make our own agenda, and then we usually have a token Palestinian or a token Arab, hardly ever both or more than one. And then when you have the tokens, we make a strategy, and they'll even then go and ask the group to implement their strategy.
Well, Renee, it's funny. Like
I'm actually saying something that has happened. So
yeah. It's funny. Like if you watch CNN, but CNN or NPR, a lot of the like they've used my friend as a spokesperson a lot since the beginning. Hani Al-Madoun, who works for UNRWA. And again, this is not the critical, because Hani's in an awful situation because his family lives in Gaza. I mean, his wife and kids live with him in suburban DC, but his mom, his dad, his brother, and his brother's entire family were killed in an airstrike. Right, like right before the pause. Right, we got caught up with that, and then the other brother, the grocer, was picked up. They forced to strip down and picked up, and then he was released, and then they put him back in prison, and they're eating now like dog food. You know what I mean? And it's horrendous. And the family home has been totally destroyed. But his thing as the UNRWA, so they put him and because he's not a very he's a what do you call it? He went to school I call him the Mormon. He went to school at BYU, so he's a development person. So he doesn't. So he's not a political person, right? And also his temperament. I enjoy. He's very funny guys, like the Ray Romano of Palestine, right? So he has a very easygoing, easy thing. But when he's on the thing, he can't even help it because it's atrocious. Like even what this has done, it's actually also politicized a lot of people that weren't political because it's so outrageous.
People who were cutting off ties to me in 2020 because they found it so hurtful that I couldn't support Biden. They're refusing to support Biden in 2024 over Palestine. None of them want to reestablish ties with me, of course, but that's a whole other story. But and I have to wrap it up because my wife banged on the door a little while ago. And so my final thought, and then I'll let you guys have yours, but my final thought is really that the problem is that the U.S. wants to decide what happens everywhere around the world, and that neither the U.S.'s allies or the people who are being killed by those allies really have any respect for what the U.S. thinks in this situation. And in the case of the Palestinians, hey, why should they respect somebody who's supporting Netanyahu? And that's where I am that's my final thought as an American. You want to blame somebody for the U.S. loss of prestige in the world, blame American leadership. I mean, one of the reasons we were electing Biden allegedly was to restore how the rest of the world saw America after Trump, the way Obama supposedly restored the way the rest of the world saw America after W. And do you think the rest of the world has changed attitudes about America from Trump to Biden in the same way it changed attitudes about America from W to Obama? Because I see Biden making it worse, not better. I see Biden running with a lot of the same idea. Because remember, Biden supported the Iraq war because he was a U.S. unilateralist, just like W.
Well, you didn't want us to talk because we were each going to have 1 point, right?
That's right. So I'm done. That's my final thought. I'm done. You guys finish up. Sorry.
I'm going to do a shameless pitch about our organization.
Please.
So, Paul, why don't you go first, and then I'll do my shameless pitch.
Well, you know, I don't know if you know, but like for years in Israel, it was illegal for members of the PLO. Well, it was illegal for Israeli citizens to talk to members of the PLO.
Yes.
But the thing about the members of the PLO was that the PLO was the umbrella organization, the political representation of the Palestinian people, meaning that the state of Israel didn't want any of its citizens talking to political Palestinians, right? And so for me, like even now in America, because there's always been here like a tacit censorship, right? That the fact that we're talking, if it's 3 or 2 or whatever it is, it's still positive because to me, again, as a poet, I actually think like truth is subjective, right? That without being narcissistic, but like the collective and my people starts with like me, right? And the decisions that I make or the decisions my people make. And like I said, here in New Orleans, a lot of these businesses don't even publicize that they're Palestinians because they're scared. You know, and I've never been, but in the same way, like it's hard for me to make political connections with people that think you're a rabble rouser or think, you know what I'm saying? Because there are some people who just want to assimilate, put their head down. And then when there's a massacre, they'll go to a fundraiser and they'll give a lot of money to UNRWA. And then it'll happen again, like Groundhog Day. But unless you deal with what that's why white liberals now, their hair's on fire. Oh, we can't believe this is happening. Ceasefire. Well, I never heard you motherfuckers talk anything about apartheid and blockade or siege for 20 years, or for since 1967, since 1948. Where the fuck were you? Or now, like your generations, your grandparents, your parents. You know what I mean?
In 1948, Albert Einstein was calling them out, so it's actually gotten worse.
Oh yeah. Well, that's right. When Renee says about Hamas then changing the language to make it more inclusive and stuff like that. Sometimes, like I don't want to be like the older guy, or the older person being nostalgic, and I keep talking about Intifada, but sometimes I feel like we have to go back to the thing because they talk about progress, but actually there's been a regression of it. But the regression has been strategic. Like I said, facts on the ground. What you said, Chris and Renee, the settlements, all of that was pre-planned to change the demographics. Yep. And so that's why I'll go back, and that's how I'll end. That we have to start talking. We have to start thinking and talking about the land again. And the land is what defines us.
To steal an indigenous and American term, land back.
Yeah, land back, absolutely. And there has been a land movement, but even that was like subverted, and because we have a different,
It's worth noting that and I'm doing more than just one. I'm putting in one extra thought again. I can't help it. The original conflict between settlers and locals that made people start saying maybe this isn't such a good idea related to land and the buying of land owned by big landlords that was worked by Palestinian peasants that then became collective settler farms, collectively worked by settlers or people they paid to work, which put all those Palestinian peasants into the cities. Okay, it started with land.
Paul, let Paul finish. You started debate now.
Thank you. So I know an artist here. She's Jewish, and she's like in her early 60s, but she's a sort of new to like JV, Jewish Voices for Peace. So now like more on the radical pro-Palestinian sort of thing, right? And she's cool, but she also kind of like she lived on a kibbutz. I think she's from Illinois, from Chicago. She lived on a kibbutz for years with her mom. And then one day she was tilling the land, never thought about Palestinian, and she was tilling the land on a kibbutz, I guess, near Tel Aviv or near Jaffa. And she unearthed a doll with the Palestinian embroidery. So she started like questioning about what is this? And so she had never thought about Palestinians, right? About that there were people before. So then she started, because she's an artist, she was a dancer, now she does visual art. And on her and her husband, also Jewish from New Jersey, he's very progressive. But they live in a very gentrified neighborhood here in New Orleans, in the Bywater, right? And on their front lawn, they have a Black Lives Matter thing. And so we were going to do this project together. And she said she had done this project, a visual project of photographs of her wearing like the traditional Jewish thing, and then it switches off, and then she's wearing like an Islamic thing, and then in the project she's burning her Israeli passport, right? So she made a proposal to the Contemporary Arts Center here, and they said no to her, right? Because they thought it was too pro-Palestinian. So I said to her, well, imagine what a Palestinian artist, or in my case a poet, dealing with these institutions. And she said, no, it's harder for her, right? Because she still has that colonial mindset. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to us, like the issue has always been the land. So that's it.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So what I want to say is this about our group. So I'm the organizer for the River Valley branch of Code Pink.
Yes.
The reason why this branch was set up in this way was in order to enable some differences from what a usual branch does. One thing is that we're committed to always having an Arab, American, Palestinian leadership.
Makes sense.
On work around Palestine, and otherwise, if you want to use BIPOC, which again, I don't think applies well with us, even though younger people Arabs use it, but BIPOC or MENA people in terms of the work overall about the U.S., because we're viewing it in that way. We're not viewing it in that nationalistic way of like, your leadership has to only be the national liberation struggle people of that. No, we're not saying that at all. But we are saying that just because the movements aren't here, our accountability about what's needed and what they want is to read what they're asking of us. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. So that's a difference. Another difference is that a lot of times when you go to the left, it's all about the line, having the correct political line.
Yes.
Not about community. And right now, most of the Palestinian and Arab people who are dealing with this, as well as Muslim people, as well as indigenous people around the world, are having a really, really, really hard time. And yet balancing being activists, really taking in and seeing and experiencing the horrors and responding appropriately and doing the act and living the life anyway of trying to keep doing our jobs. And everyone is having trouble sleeping. Everyone that I know in this is having trauma up the wazoo. So we really take time in our meetings to process these things, which, is a really different thing. We don't just go into the line. If you want, panel.
Not me, I'm fine.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. I love that word fine. What's fine mean? But
the kids are all right.
Well, we're alive. Yeah, no, we're more than alive, and we are more than alive, and we have to take care. And because we're more than alive, we have to eat and do all that stuff. Because if we get too caught in the trauma of it ourselves every moment, which it is personal to each of us, but if we get too caught in that, then we're not going to do our, just as a revolutionary, that's not a good idea. Right. So you have to, but that means not pushing like a lot of the people, a lot of Arab Americans are Arab Americans, and they push. And they have that American sort of achievement thing, and they don't know how to be able to get that sense of community. And for that, we need to look to the people in Gaza. And as I said in the other thing, when you look at them dealing with the crisis and you see them reaching out for one another and really embracing the pain in full throttle, you see it. They're not just internalizing this stuff so that they can come back and become like the Zionists, but because that's what trauma can do. It can either open your perspective, right, to identifying with others who suffer in the world and changing it. But the other thing suffering can do is it can make you, in total or in part, really rigid and unable to take care of any people but yourself, and make you essentially Zionists. And so if we want to become that, so our organization,
also,
yes,
like
but
what
yeah, go ahead.
He's lagging a little.
Yeah. Paul, we are not hearing you. There we are. I can see
now
you.
He's caught up for a moment.
I bet we'll see you. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that sometimes, just like indigenous people. Oh, hello?
Yeah, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
I think sometimes people
He's saying
miss that it's a struggle for it's a struggle for culture. Do you know what I mean? Like Arabs are very emotive, and Arabs also, like I made a joke, I'm all right. Obviously, I'm not all right. How the hell can you be all right? But it's like the French Filon thing that my mental health is connected to the mental health of the collective of my community, right? So how the hell can I sleep if 30,000 of my people have been eradicated? So, and I don't mean this about guilt or the survivor's guilt. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in a real palpable human way. Of course, I'm not all right, but there are, just like Fanon, there are ways of therapy to me, and maybe I should. I was about to say something. I won't say.
I also have studied Fanon.
There are ways that can be therapeutic if so, and it's the thing the thing that what you were saying too before about the good Palestinian or the good immigrants, right? And at one point you said, well, because when your people are being eradicated, it's not just your people, it's you. Part of me is dying now, right? So how
it's also recognition. Yeah.
Rectify that? How can we stop that? Yeah. And then it's like, as I say, I'm a poet, right? I'm not a master's of fine art poet, right? I study theology, right? But even the way poetry and the poetic is treated in America, it's marginalized. It's marginalized because poetry is the art form of truth and subjectivity, right? Whereas in America, everything is the hegemony and it's consumerism. So even poetry, it's hidden in universities, because once you put it in the university, it's safe. Right. Well, so poetry is not supposed to be safe. It's supposed to rattle you. And it's supposed, so when you go, it's kind of like religion. When you go to the Middle East and people talk about Allah, even the Christians talk about Allah, because it's not a dogmatic thing. Because the whole thing is, well, but the fundamentalism is a modern invention.
Right.
Because if you studied like the Crusades and Saladin and that openness, right, and the Sufis who were very open, the fundamentalism is a connection to colonialism.
Well, the fundamentalism
hegemony.
You just said we weren't doing that, so I was in the middle of doing a spiel.
Yes. She was doing a spiel.
I was in the middle of the spiel. We were supposed to be closing, right?
She was doing her closeout, yes.
And so I don't speak Yiddish. I love Yiddish. Well, okay, close it out.
I'm doing a spiel. But anyway, so when we started doing this and decided to do the campaign to invoke the Genocide Convention, now to enact the Genocide Convention, those were the principles, that it was going to be very clear that this was for self-determination, but that the leadership was going to reflect it, so that we were getting perspective the whole time, but also that we're not dumb. Individual Arab American and Palestinian American perspectives are not necessarily the perspective of the resistance movement. And guess what takes priority? Not us.
Resistance.
Yeah. So that's part of what our group does. And also tries to find a space so that someone who's a poet, if Paul wants to do a open Palestinian poetry thing, he would be enabled to do it. And we would all work and figure it out. If someone else wants to now, our focus, what we don't move is our basic principles and our goals. Those hold steady.
Thank you for enabling
me. But how we get there has to do with the people finding their own way.
Thank you for enabling me.
Oh, aren't they cute? Yeah. But, but seriously, we enable each other because we're able to be in that community, experience both the hard stuff and our commitment to the work, and do something that is really uncommon even in the Palestinian resistance, right? Of really also trying to be who we are and finding that unique way of being ourselves in the world and being able to be an activist, but only within the agreement, right? If they come up with something that isn't within what we're talking about, those things, forget it. But there's tons of things you can do with it, so we're very flexible with the how, not with the principles of the organization. And I would say you can read more to get a sense of the organization at my profile on Facebook. It's R. Levant. And on, on Twitter, it's Renee, the full name, ReneeLevant, and at Renee Levant. And if you go to that, I have the thing about a description of the organization, what we see as the current tasks, what we're doing, and we do a lot. We are COVID safe, and so we're committed to making a safe space. Whether we do things, we've done mostly online. We're doing more and more in real time when there's a core of our people in that same location. There's not a requirement. We are based in Western Mass. There's a few of us, but it's perfectly fine to be from anywhere. And what we do is we actually do actions. We don't just post about it online. We harass, encourage the various governments and states and people about the issues. We take them on so that they do not have space to just put out what they're putting out. And also that we can actually have different kinds of impacts. And you'll see in that thing, we describe some of how on our action alerts are usually about, hey, like we have one for UNRWA right now. Here's the way to take this on as an activist doing online stuff. And so we do it very particularly. So yeah, if you go to Code Pink's general site, you'll get something like you can do a general petition. But if what you want to do is more like community organizing approach to it, you want to come down to the River Valley branch of Code Pink and the campaign to enact the Genocide Convention, and and join us. And right now, because we're forming, there's a core of us that we know are solid, and we're sort of the core. And then other people have been loosely connected. We're looking at finding more formal ways for our pretty large base of people to be more formally connected, and we're asking them ideas about that too. And because we are committed to keeping the leadership to be the kind of thing it is now. I mean, right now we've got 2 Palestinians, 2 Syrians, 1 indigenous person, and 1 Black person, and 1 Malaysian woman who are part of the core. So, that's who we are right now as far as our core group. And there are other, oh no, I'm leaving. Oh, do you realize who I just left out, Paul? I'm so sorry. I know you're going to watch it. Oh my God, her name's spacing. Who is our buddy from, woman the revolutionary from, not Trinidad. Yeah, she's from Trinidad. Older woman, revolutionary from Trinidad is the other person who's part of our group. So that's kind of I'm so sorry.
We need a Mexican. We don't have a Mexican. We need a Mexican.
Oh yeah, because that's what we do. We're into like the quota thing. But no, I would like to see some of our members, some of the people who have been active helping us, not exactly members. I'd love if they wanted to set up a branch that was more Spanish speaking. I'm about doing community organizing, and about our movement providing an alternative to what's out there on the left, an alternative that sees who we are, whether it's in Palestine work or otherwise, in the context of the working class movement in the world, that does see that we are in a time that can either be very promising or can be horrendous, and where this is going to go, and that likely there's going to be a little up and down going on here. And that we're about to be going through a lot, and it's going to be especially intense because Palestine is, well, there are other areas you could kind of talk colonialism, as far as the old colonialism, long time state that's been there, like we've never had a siege like in Gaza to lift, or a blockade in Gaza to lift. So we are going to stay focused on Palestine, but we will take on other issues. Always COVID safe, whether it's online or not, because we think that the same kind of denial of information you've had on Palestine has been going on with COVID. And frankly, this may be one of the interesting legacies of Gaza, just as an aside. If I was a virus, that's where I'd go.
Well, and let's remember that the Gaza siege has included not letting COVID vaccines into Gaza.
Well, then they sent COVID, not vaccines, but kits to test, which doesn't really matter when you're, but we already have 60, with all of the respiratory viruses, a number of Palestinian doctors have suggested that it's going wild there. It's not the only thing that's going wild there. But the problem is it's a great incubator. So we may wind up seeing the revenge of Gaza in the form of a variant that's going to come and hit us because we're such dingbats about this stuff. But in any case, if you want that kind of a thing where you are going to make a space where people can really participate if they have disabilities and if they have COVID, where that's a given, that's not something they have to negotiate or do an accommodation for, and in a place that centers Arab and Palestinian and then BIPOC voices, and a place that is going to be paying careful attention to every contact we get that comes from the National Liberation Movement itself in a regular way, not like being set up and then, oh, well, we were set up and that's why we're doing this, and then running it like white people. Okay, that's not what we're doing. You're welcome if you're white, but that's not what we're doing. So if that appeals to you, that kind of an organization, then by all means, I would love to see you, because we have a lot of work to do, and we need the support around getting through it in the most concrete ways, because this is exceptionally hard because of the way in which trauma is hooked into this issue. And Palestine is not just one of the issues. It's going to be the center battle over the role of the West. So this is it. And really, that's about what I can say. And I can also say that I love my people. They're cool, and we have fun.
And I would say that the only way that people are ever going to eventually all come together on the right political line is if we build the community first.
I like having the line first.
Well, true. You have to have a little bit of both. I mean, it's good to have the line, but if you, in the end, the purpose of the political line is to serve the people that it is supposed to benefit.
Right. Ultimately, like a lot of people in a lot of parties, you really wouldn't necessarily want them being in charge, or like they're good at doing a rally, but are they good at actually like dealing with the day-to-day needs of the people and paying attention to that around them? Those are really different skills. And so we're more in that community organizing mode, and also in a much more relational mode, which is part of Code Pink, right? Being part of, I've always said womanist, they might say feminist, and as well as against capitalism and colonialism and Zionism. So it's great that they've allowed the space for this kind of a group, and for the campaigns we're running. And so that's about what I can say about that. And I think that we are going to have some very hard times, but also some real wins. And we're going to have to be able, even in the midst of the horrible stuff, to take the win, even when it's a kind of messed up win. And at the same time, recognize how messed up it is, be angry about it, etc. You know, we're going to have to be able to do both, because we are at a time where the U.S. empire is really under challenge.
No, I agree. And I think that's a good place for us to all end it, is we are in the crisis of the empire, and we're going to see what happens. And we really need to do everything we can to try to help influence it in the right way, whatever that is. And I think that's a good place for us all to stop. I want to thank both Dr. Levant and Paul for joining us today. Thank you, guys. Yep. And I want to thank everybody who's watched. And I want to thank Renee for being able to join us.
I'm a master. I'm a master.
Master. Good to know.
Paul.
I'm just an autodidact with a high school diploma, but I do what I can.
What's an? No, I'm not going to ask.
An autodidact is a fancy word of saying I taught myself everything I know.
Yeah, because when we teach ourselves, it's much richer. Yep.
But on that note, I really want to thank you both again. I want to thank everyone who's watching. I will try to book a show for next week. I am a little bit behind for the first time this year, but I'm still hoping to stay on the ball. Again, thanks everybody, and I'll tweet at you. Take care.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been on for